The loop of doubt. Imagine standing in front of a door, unsure whether to open it. You hesitate. Then you wonder if your hesitation itself is valid. That's when it begins. Not the doubt, but the doubt about your doubt. Welcome to the loop of doubt, a spiral where certainty dies not once, but 1,000 times. It feels like thinking. It feels like awareness. But it's not clarity, it's erosion. Every thought you have starts to fold in on itself. Did I lock the door? Becomes, did I just imagine thinking I locked the door? Becomes, can I even trust memory at all? It's a real psychological pattern. In obsessive-compulsive disorder, recursive doubt can paralyze decisions. People wash their hands, then question if they did it right. So they repeat it. Again and again. The act no longer matters, only the doubt does. This loop is also spiritual. René Descartes tried to escape it through radical doubt, questioning everything until one truth remained. I think, therefore I am. But even that has been doubted. If thoughts exist, who owns them? If you doubt yourself, is there a self? Doubt feels intelligent. It's self-correcting, skeptical, curious. But without a ground to land on, it turns inward. It eats its own roots. You begin to doubt your motives, your emotions, your perception. You trust nothing, except the loop. It becomes a safety net and a prison. At first, doubt protected you from naivety, from manipulation. But soon it blocks you from trust, from rest, from belief. You start questioning every yes with a but, and every no with a maybe. And worst of all, you start to admire the loop. Because it feels deep. It feels like you're peeling back reality, that you're somehow smarter for never landing anywhere. But this is the trap. The loop convinces you that circling the truth is more virtuous than touching it, that constant questioning is a form of enlightenment, when really, it can be a form of paralysis. Think of the person in a relationship who doubts their partner's love. So, they ask for reassurance, but when they get it, they question the sincerity. Then they doubt their own reaction. Are they just insecure, or is their gut trying to warn them? And now, they don't trust the partner, the answer, or themselves. The loop has consumed the connection. This happens in creativity too. The writer who rewrites the same sentence 100 times, not to improve it, but because they doubt their ability to decide. The musician who scraps every draft. The artist who never finishes a painting. Not because they're perfectionists, but because they don't believe they know what done feels like anymore. Even in morality, doubt loops emerge. You question your choices. Then you question the system that defines right and wrong. Then you question your ability to question, and suddenly, you're suspended. Not unethical, not moral, just weightless. Some call it overthinking, but that word doesn't capture the weight of it. This is more than thinking too much. This is losing the floor beneath thought entirely. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once said, "A doubt without an end is not even a doubt. It's a drowning." The irony? You trust the loop. You believe the doubt is doing something, protecting you, refining you, keeping you safe from deception, from delusion. But it becomes its own kind of delusion, the belief that certainty is always dangerous and doubt is always noble. So you stop committing to decisions, to beliefs, to identity. You float between ideas like a ghost, touching nothing fully, afraid to collapse into anything too solid, because solidity could be a lie. But the loop can't give you what life demands: action, love, sacrifice, risk. Those things need faith. Not blind faith, but the courage to stand still in uncertainty and still say, I choose this. You can't think your way out of doubt. At some point, you have to leap, even if you land on something imperfect, even if you later revise it, because the loop never gives you peace. It only gives you more loop, and loop isn't freedom, it's orbit, and orbit never touches ground. History is filled with people who shattered the loop, not because they had certainty, but because they acted anyway. Galileo doubted the church, but he still pointed his telescope. Mandela doubted justice, but he still fought for it. None of them had proof they would succeed, but they moved. And in motion, they found meaning. The loop is seductive because it keeps you safe. If you never commit, you never fail. If you always question, you never get tricked. But you also never feel love, or courage, or creation. You sit in the bleachers, narrating the game you're too scared to play. And even when you think you've escaped it, it returns. You say, this is right. Then the voice whispers, "But what if it's not?" You say, "I trust them." Then it says, "Are you sure?" You say, "This is who I am." And the loop replies, "Says who?" So what do? You listen, but don't obey. You doubt, but don't collapse. You ask questions, but know when to stop asking and start building. Not everything can be solved by the mind. Some things must be held by the heart. And the heart doesn't loop. It beats. When you feel the loop tightening, breathe. Say, "I see you." Then choose anyway. Because life won't wait for certainty. And neither should you. You don't escape the loop by thinking harder. You escape it by stepping through it. Not because you're sure, but because you're done waiting to be. The mirror question loop. You ask, "Who am I?" And in the very asking, something shifts. The question casts a reflection. The reflection becomes a self. You stare into it, thinking you found the answer. But the moment you believe it, the reflection is already outdated. Because now you are the one who believes. And belief is a mutation. So you ask again. This is the mirror question loop, the recursive trap of self-inquiry, where every answer warps the one who asked. You are never static. And yet you seek a stable definition. A truth about yourself that holds still long enough to become real. But every definition becomes a distortion the moment you accept it. You say, "I am strong." And now you begin to shape yourself around that identity, avoiding weakness, performing certainty. You say, "I am broken." And suddenly your story shifts to match the damage. Labels become masks. Masks become skin. But here's the paradox. You can't stop asking. You can't not wonder who you are. And yet every answer is a snapshot, frozen, limited, bound by the moment in which it was spoken. You are not that moment. You are the movement. The question doesn't reveal your identity. It creates it. And the cycle continues. Ask, believe, become, outgrow. Then ask again. This is not failure. This is evolution. It begins when you're young. Someone asks, "What do you want to be?" And without knowing, you begin constructing the answer. Maybe you say artist, or doctor, or astronaut. Not because the identity is true, but because it feels admired, or safe, or real enough to anchor you for now. But time moves, you grow, you shed that version, and the question echoes again. Who am I now? So you try again. New answer, new belief, new personality to wear like skin. But here's the quiet violence. Every answer solidifies a boundary. It creates a perimeter around what you believe you are. And outside that perimeter is everything you are not allowed to be. You say, "I am kind." But now you suppress anger. You say, "I am logical." So now emotion becomes a threat. Each identity becomes a contract. One you never signed, but agreed to anyway, because the world wants definitions, categories, labels, certainty. But you are not a category. You are not a brand. You are a question wrapped in muscle and memory. And yet, the loop persists. You feel it late at night, when no one's watching. The sense that your reflection is incomplete, that no version of you ever fully holds. You change your hair, your habits, your beliefs. Not to deceive, but to rediscover. To mirror back something truer. But the mirror always bends. It reflects not who you are, but who you think you are. And that thought corrupts the next image. That's why the loop is infinite. Even therapy does this. You say, "I feel lost." The therapist says, "Why?" And now you construct a narrative to explain the feeling. That narrative becomes a new layer, a self who is healing, a self with a wound. And then you try to live according to that diagnosis, even if it no longer fits. You see, even healing can become an identity, one you get stuck inside. So who are you? Not the voice, not the wound, not even the watcher behind the thought. Because the watcher is asking the question, and the question itself is the distortion. Like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You will always be slightly behind your own becoming. And yet, this loop is not your prison. It's your proof. Proof that you are alive, adaptive, unfinished. The question keeps you open, fluid, in motion. It burns away certainty, which is the birthplace of compassion. Because when you realize your own identity is unstable, you stop demanding stability from others. You stop needing people to be consistent. You stop needing yourself to be a fixed shape. And in that surrender, you glimpse something rare, a self that doesn't need to be explained, only experienced. So maybe the question isn't who am I? Maybe it's who am I becoming now? Or even more gently, what is arising in me today? Because identity is not a discovery. It's a rhythm, a wave. It crashes, reshapes, returns. It is not a single face in the mirror, but the act of looking itself. The breath behind the question. The ache beneath the answer. You wake up one day certain you're strong, the next, fragile, then creative, then numb. All of them true, all of them partial. You are not the answer. You are the whole spectrum of questions in motion, a mosaic that rearranges every time you blink. And maybe, just maybe, the wisest thing you can say is, I don't know. Not out of defeat, but out of reverence. Reverence for the mystery that lives inside your voice. The one that refuses to be captured. The one that laughs every time you think you finally named it. Because once you name the self, you've already outgrown it. And so you return to the mirror. Not to find truth, but to meet the next version of yourself waiting behind the glass. And this time, when you ask, who am I? Maybe you don't need an answer. Maybe the question is the point. The authenticity spiral. You try to be real. That's all anyone wants now, isn't it? Be real, be raw, be authentic, be yourself. But the moment you try, something breaks. Because now you're trying. And trying to be real makes it feel fake. You second guess your tone, your posture, your words. You question whether your laugh is too loud or your silence too long. You ask yourself, am I being honest or performing honesty? And the more you ask, the worse it gets. So you do what seems smart. You try not to try. You go for effortless, unfiltered, casual. But suddenly you're curating your not trying the same way you curated your performance. You're selecting which flaws to show, which vulnerabilities seem safest, which imperfections will look the most genuine. Now you're pretending to be effortless. And that's the spiral, the authenticity spiral. It begins with good intentions. You want to be real. You want to connect. But the moment you become aware of yourself being real, a mirror appears, and now you're watching yourself perform. You're both the actor and the audience, and that duality splits the moment. It steals the purity, because now every move is layered with meaning. Every silence becomes a tactic. Every tear has a shadow of doubt. You wonder, was that real emotion? Or was that what I've learned real emotion looks like? And just like that, the truth gets contaminated. You don't fake it on purpose. You don't lie. You want to be authentic. But awareness twists everything, like trying to watch yourself sleep. The moment you notice, the state collapses. This happens everywhere. You tell a story that once felt vulnerable, but now you've told it 5 times. People nod. They admire your honesty. They call you brave. And now, it's not vulnerability anymore. It's content. You say something raw. It lands well. So next time, you plan it. Not because you're fake, because you're scared, because being raw without reward is terrifying. So you build a version of authenticity that earns validation, but still feels real enough to believe. And then, you forget which parts were ever real. This spiral shows up online too. You post your unfiltered thoughts, but only after filtering out the ones that feel too unlikable. You post your messy hair photo, but only after checking the lighting. You say, I don't care what people think. But that sentence exists because you care. That's the loop. We don't just perform our masks anymore. We perform our removal of them. We don't hide behind filters. We filter the way we reveal ourselves. And it leaves you hollow. Because even when people love the real you, some part of you whispers, they're not loving the real me. They're loving the performance of it. And now you feel lonelier than when you were fake. Because at least then, you knew it was a mask. Now, you're not sure what's underneath. So, how do you escape the spiral? You don't. Not fully because self-awareness never leaves. The mirror doesn't break. You will always know, at some level, that you're being observed. By others, by yourself. But here's the paradox. Maybe authenticity isn't about being unfiltered. Maybe it's about not hiding the fact that you're filtering. Maybe being real isn't about saying whatever comes to mind, but admitting that sometimes you don't know what's real in the first place, that you want to be known, that you hate how much you care, that you're tired of performing, but terrified of silence. That sometimes your honesty is clumsy, rehearsed, or even strategic, but it's still yours. Maybe the most authentic thing you can say is, I don't know if I'm being authentic right now, because that's the truth. That's where the spiral softens. Not in some perfect performance of realness, but in the moment you admit you're spinning, that you're trying, failing, pretending, deleting, wondering, and doing it all with a desperate hope that someone out there sees the human beneath it. And maybe they do. Not because you found the perfect way to be raw, but because you let them witness your search for it. So stop waiting for the perfect version of you to feel real. Stop punishing yourself for noticing your own performance. You are a human being who has learned to survive in mirrors. That doesn't make you fake. That makes you aware. And in a world where everyone's trying to be effortless, maybe the most honest thing you can do is try anyway. The meaning maker trap. You wake up. You check your phone. You go to work. You eat. You scroll. You sleep. Somewhere in between you feel it. The quiet, aching question that never truly goes away. What is all this for? What am I doing with my life? What does it all mean? And in that moment, something dangerous happens. Your brain begins building meaning. You reach for patterns, stories, connections, anything to make the chaos feel coherent. A breakup wasn't just pain, it was growth. A missed opportunity wasn't failure, it was fate. You begin to interpret life not as a sequence of events, but as a narrative, a novel where you are both the author and the reader, both the actor and the audience. But here's the catch. The meaning maker trap begins when you realize that the meaning wasn't there until you looked for it. It didn't exist until your mind created it. Like a spotlight that makes the stage appear as you shine it. Meaning flickers into view only when you stare hard enough. So, the question is this. Did you find meaning? Or did you invent it? And if it's invented, does that make it less real? Or more? This is where things become terrifyingly beautiful. Humans are not creatures that discover meaning like fossils buried in stone. We're creators of it, sculptors of context, architects of significance. And the very act of searching ensures that we'll always see something, because the brain hates a void. Look at constellations. Thousands of years ago, humans stared at random stars and invented gods, animals, and epic stories in the sky. Why? Because pure randomness is unbearable. We'd rather live in a myth than float in a meaningless void. And that instinct never left us. A song comes on during a breakup, and we call it a sign. A stranger smiles during a bad day, and it means something. A dream feels important, even if it's nonsense. Why? Because our brains are wired to connect, interpret, and assign meaning, even when none exists. This is why the same event can destroy one person but liberate another. It's not the event. It's the meaning the mind wraps around it. The frame, the lens, the invented story. But here's the danger. If you believe that meaning is something out there, waiting to be unlocked like a hidden message, you may spend your entire life searching and never living. Always trying to decipher instead of experience. Always waiting for life to make sense instead of making something out of it. This is the trap. The belief that meaning is a destination. That one day you'll arrive and finally understand. But meaning is not a place. It's not a thing you hold. It's a motion, a breath, a mirage that becomes real only because you choose to believe in it. Let's take an example. Two people lose their jobs. One says, "This is a sign the universe is against me. I'll never succeed." The other says, "This is the universe pushing me towards something better." Same reality, different meaning. And that meaning shapes everything: mood, action, identity, future. So what changed? Not the facts, just the frame, just the narrative being told inside their head. Meaning is not the truth. It is the story we wrap around the truth to make it survivable. Even in tragedy, this is clear. A parent loses a child, and they start a foundation to help others. A survivor of war becomes a peace activist. They build meaning from suffering. Not because the pain was part of a grand plan, but because they refuse to let the pain stay meaningless. And here's the most haunting part. This ability to assign meaning is both our salvation and our prison. Because the same skill that makes us resilient also makes us delusional. We can explain anything away. We can turn lies into beliefs. We can call abuse destiny, or addiction purpose, or isolation freedom. We can construct worlds where we are always the hero, always the victim, always the chosen one. In this way, the mind becomes both the painter and the illusion. So, how do we escape the trap? Maybe we don't. Maybe we embrace it. Not by denying that meaning is invented, but by choosing to invent better, more consciously, more honestly. By asking ourselves, is this meaning helping me grow, or just helping me cope? Is this belief giving me strength, or just giving me excuses? Because the goal isn't to stop assigning meaning, it's to do it on purpose. You see, the meaning you assign to life is not just decoration, it's architecture. It shapes your choices, your emotions, your identity. It becomes the difference between depression and insight, between paralysis and purpose. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop searching for meaning, it sometimes finds you in a quiet walk, in a conversation you didn't expect, in a moment of laughter or loss. You didn't try to extract meaning, but it arrived anyway. Unexpected, undeniable. And in that moment, it felt real. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was always your mind doing what it does best, making chaos feel like poetry. And maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe that's our superpower. To wake up in a world of randomness and write meaning anyway. To stand on a tiny planet in a silent universe and whisper back, this matters. This is enough. So when you ask yourself, what does it all mean? Remember this. It means exactly what you're willing to give it. And if meaning is invented, then invent something beautiful. The why chain loop. You ask, why? And someone answers, maybe a parent, a teacher, a friend, a voice inside your head. They say, because X, but it doesn't satisfy. Not really. So you ask again. Why X? Another answer arrives, because Y. But that only opens another door. Why Y? And just like that, you're inside it, the why chain loop. A question that breeds another question, and another, until you're no longer looking for truth. You're chasing ghosts in a hallway that keeps rearranging itself. Every answer seems like progress, until you realize it's just decoration on another question mark. And the deeper you go, the more complex the hat the echo wears. It looks wiser. It sounds fancier. But it's still the same thing. A placeholder. A patch over the hole. A gentle lie to hold back the vertigo. Children do it innocently. They ask, why is the sky blue? You say, because of light scattering. They nod, then tilt their head. Why does light scatter? You explain particles, wavelengths. They pause. Why do wavelengths behave that way? And soon, you're out of depth. The child isn't wrong. They're just doing what the mind was built to do, follow the chain until it breaks. But what no one tells you is this. There is no final link. There's no bedrock. Only softer floors under deeper illusions. Ask someone why they work. They say, to make money. Why money? To buy things I need. Why need things? To survive. Why survive? Because I want to live. Why live? And here it is. The fracture point. Some say because life is beautiful, some say because I'm afraid of death. Some shrug, some cry, some fall silent. Because this is where language begins to fail. This is where logic bends inward and creates loops instead of ladders. And you find yourself back where you started, standing on a spinning floor. The why chain is not wrong, it's just infinite. And infinity is not a place you can live in. The brain was not designed to handle recursion forever. It craves finality, certainty, a stable wall to press against. But the why chain offers none. It's like a mirror facing a mirror, beautiful, endless, paralyzing. And in that infinite corridor, something else creeps in, anxiety. Because what if there is no final answer? What if you've been chasing a horizon that retreats as you run? What if the question itself is flawed? That's when the real fear begins, not of the unknown, but of the unknowable. People build belief systems around this fear, gods, philosophies, manifestos, even science, each offering a framework, a stopping point, a flag to plant and say, here, this is enough. But the why creeps in even there. Why does God allow suffering? Why does the universe follow these laws? Why does anything exist at all? Every foundation becomes shaky when enough pressure is applied, and yet, we keep asking. Not because we're foolish, but because we're human. To ask why is to be alive. To question is to resist sleepwalking. To chase meaning, even in madness. But meaning may not live at the end of a question. It may live in the choice to stop asking. Not out of ignorance, but out of reverence, out of peace, out of the realization that maybe, just maybe, the loop was never meant to end. Because when you keep asking why, you also delay living. You dissect love instead of feeling it. You explain beauty instead of standing inside it. You analyze joy until it dissolves into variables. Imagine a man watching a sunset. He feels awe. But then he wonders, why does this make me feel awe? What is awe biologically? Is it evolutionary? Is it chemical? And in that spiral, he misses the sunset. The why chain doesn't just pull you down, it pulls you out of the present. It replaces presence with abstraction. It trades the warmth of fire for a textbook on combustion. But that doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means you learn when to let go. Not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are meant to be held. Some are meant to burn in your chest like poetry, not equations. You don't ask the ocean why it crashes. You don't ask a dream why it fades. You don't ask music why it moves you. You feel it. You become it. The why chain teaches you humility. It brings you to your knees before the infinite. But it also invites a quiet rebellion, a choice to pause the loop, to say, this is enough, to breathe, to live, to marvel. Because the why will still be there tomorrow. But this moment, this breath, this love, this life, it won't. The pattern recognition prison. Imagine walking into a room and instantly sensing something's wrong, but you can't say why. Your brain is whispering, there's a pattern here, a rhythm, a clue, and you listen. Because humans are wired to see patterns, even in noise. But what happens when the pattern isn't real? When your brain creates connections where none exist? You start seeing meaning in chaos. A twitch becomes a lie. A coincidence becomes fate. A glance becomes betrayal. Welcome to the pattern recognition prison, where your mind's greatest survival skill becomes your deepest trap. Pattern recognition is how we evolved. It saved us. It told early humans which plants were poisonous, which animals were predators, and which clouds meant a storm was coming. It told stories with stars. It invented gods from weather. It made maps of uncertainty. But the modern world doesn't play by primal rules. Today, we see faces in toast, ghosts in shadows, signs in random numbers. We feel watched when alone. We predict outcomes from dreams. Our brains scream meaning at static. And once the pattern is felt, we don't let it go. Because the brain hates randomness. It aches for order, even if that order is wrong. This is how superstitions are born, how gamblers believe in hot streaks, how conspiracy theories spread, how we invent signs from the universe because it feels safer than admitting we don't know. The pattern gives comfort. It gives control, even if it's a lie. But it doesn't stop there. It gets worse. The more patterns you see, the more you trust them. And the more you trust them, the harder it becomes to question them. This is how the prison builds itself, one invisible brick at a time. You believe your partner's silence means anger, because last time, it did. You think the number 1111 means you're on the right path, because once, a good thing happened after you saw it. You think your instincts are sharp, but forget the 100 times they were wrong. Your brain hides its misses and highlights its hits. It's called confirmation bias, and it's deadly to truth. In business, it's called the clustering illusion, seeing trends in random data. In life, it's called paranoia. In relationships, it's miscommunication. In belief systems, it becomes delusion. Even scientists, trained to resist false patterns, fall into it. Studies show that even with rigorous training, we see causality where there's only correlation. And once the story forms, it's almost impossible to unsee. This is why cults work, why advertising works, why self-help mantras seem true even when they fail, because they create patterns, predictable cycles, illusions of progress, of fate, of destiny. We are meaning machines, and meaning feels like safety. But meaning isn't always truth. Sometimes it's just habit, or hope, or fear wearing a clever disguise. There's a psychological term called apophenia the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. It's a cousin of pareidolia, seeing faces in clouds. The problem? Apophenia feels exactly like insight. You don't just think you're right, you feel it. It feels spiritual. It feels intuitive. It feels like waking up. But often, it's just the brain doing what it evolved to do, build narratives out of noise. And here's the paradox. We miss the real patterns. We ignore the behavioral loops we keep falling into. We miss the repeated wounds in our relationships. We overlook the quiet signs of burnout, of trauma, of truth. Because the patterns we invent are louder than the ones that matter. The story in our head drowns out the reality in front of us. We become prisoners of our own pattern-making machine. And the more intelligent or creative you are, the worse it gets. Because intelligence is just better storytelling, and creativity is better pattern weaving. You don't escape the trap, you decorate it. So what do? You start by doubting what feels too neat, too symmetrical, too perfect. You ask, am I seeing this or projecting it? You slow down the leap from emotion to explanation. You learn to sit in uncertainty without trying to wrap it in logic. And you listen, not just to the stories you tell, but to the ones you ignore. Because sometimes the truth isn't hiding in the pattern. Sometimes it's hiding in the silence between patterns, in the gap, the noise, the data that doesn't fit. And it's in those fractures where real freedom begins. Not in control, not in explanation, but in the courage to say, maybe I don't know, and to be okay with that. The world is not a machine you can map. It's a river you're floating in, with currents you'll never fully predict. The sky doesn't care about your signs. The universe doesn't pause to validate your intuition. And your brain, as miraculous as it is a pattern-hungry creature that would rather be wrong than feel lost. But maybe the goal was never to decode everything. Maybe the goal is to feel the texture of chaos and still move, to walk through randomness, not fearing its shadows, to hold your story lightly, knowing it's useful, but never final. Because when you cling too hard to the pattern, you miss the pulse. And life doesn't live in the pattern. It lives in the break. So, trust your mind, but hold it accountable. Watch the patterns, but don't worship them. And when you feel the prison closing in, remember this. Every pattern is just a guess, and every guess is a door. But only you can choose whether to step through it, or simply stare forever at its shape. The progress illusion cycle. You think you're growing, you journal more, you meditate, you read books about healing, purpose, and the self. You talk about boundaries and shadow work. You have the language of transformation on your lips. You post about it. You believe in it. You track your habits, your routines, your emotional triggers. And still, something feels eerily still. This is the progress illusion cycle, the quiet trap where the pursuit of growth becomes performance, where becoming better becomes a mask worn by the part of you that's terrified to truly change. And the more you believe you're evolving, the more you're just orbiting the same self. Faster, shinier, but untouched at the core. You begin identifying with progress. It becomes your proof of worth. Look how far I've come, you say, without realizing that clinging to that progress is another way to avoid the unknown. Real transformation doesn't always look good. It doesn't always fit on a timeline. Sometimes it feels like breaking, like regression, like chaos. But the illusion of growth keeps you insulated. You consume growth content like fast food. You follow spiritual influencers. You feel productive because you're working on yourself. But deep down, nothing has shifted. Not really. You've built a house of mirrors, each one showing you who you want to be, while hiding who you are. You keep searching for signs of improvement. You measure your moods. You compare this year's sadness to last year's breakdown and call it healing. But healing is not always linear. It's not always about climbing. Sometimes it's about sitting, completely still, inside what you were trained to run from. You mistake movement for direction. But a hamster wheel spins too, and it never leaves the cage. You start optimizing everything. Productivity becomes spirituality. You're meditating, but only to be more efficient. You're journaling, but only to generate insights. You're checking off self-care tasks as if your soul was a to-do list. But when was the last time you sat with your pain? Not to fix it, not to reframe it, but just to witness it. Real growth is uncomfortable. It makes you question everything you believed. It doesn't affirm the self. It dismantles it. True transformation feels like ego death, like becoming nothing, like not knowing who you are. It feels terrifying, not triumphant. And that's why the illusion is so seductive. It feels better to feel like you're growing than to actually let go of who you've been. You're not broken for being here. Everyone gets caught in the cycle. It's how we cope, how we keep from unraveling. But eventually, the illusion cracks. You start to notice that the progress you've made has become your prison, that the new you is just the old you in different clothes. And when you see that, really see it, something sacred begins. You stop pretending growth is always pretty. You stop needing it to look like success. You let it look like silence, like grief, like starting over. You begin to accept that not all progress can be posted, that some of the most important shifts happen in invisible places, in the way you respond when no one is watching, in the choice not to run, in the choice to stay soft when it's easier to harden. You realize that healing doesn't mean the old wounds disappear. It means they stop running the show. That peace doesn't mean perfection. It means you've made space for the mess. You remember the moments you sat with your shadow, not to defeat it, but to understand it. And in that understanding, something loosened, not solved, not conquered, just softened. And then something beautiful begins to happen. You start growing again, but this time without needing to call it growth. You stop naming your becoming. You just become. You stop clinging to meaning and let meaning emerge. You stop narrating your life and start inhabiting it. And that's when the illusion dissolves. Not because you finally arrived, but because you no longer need to prove that you're moving. The self doesn't always need to advance. Sometimes it just needs to dissolve. And in that dissolution, you find a freedom that no routine, ritual, or practice could offer. A freedom to be here, in this moment, without needing it to signal anything about who you are. You were never behind. You were never ahead. You were always here. And maybe, just maybe, that's what growth actually is. Not getting somewhere, but remembering you never left. You look in the mirror and stop asking if you're better than yesterday. You stop measuring your worth by how evolved you seem, and instead you ask, am I honest right now? Am I present? Not striving, not climbing, just here. You sit in the stillness that once terrified you, and it doesn't feel like failure anymore. It feels like truth. The truth that your soul never needed upgrading, only unburdening. That healing was never a ladder. It was a homecoming. And you were never stuck. You were circling something sacred until you were ready to step inside. The identity measurement error. You measure who you are by what you do. You look at your habits, your choices, your achievements, your failures. You point to them and say, this is me. The things you've built, the things you've broken, the way you speak, the way you react when no one's watching. Your identity becomes a reflection of your behavior, but behavior doesn't exist in a vacuum. What you do depends on what you believe about yourself, the roles you've accepted, the labels you've absorbed. The story you've told yourself so many times, it feels like fact. You think, I'm anxious, and so you hesitate. You think, I'm strong, and so you push through. You think, I'm not the kind of person who does that, and so you don't, even if something in you wants to. The you in your head governs the you in your life. But here's the problem. That internal identity, it was formed by the same behaviors you now use to validate it. So, which came first, the story or the action, the belief or the behavior? You tell yourself you're introverted because you avoid people, but maybe you started avoiding people because someone once called you quiet and your brain made a note. That's what I am. You say you're not creative because you haven't produced anything lately, but maybe you stopped creating the moment you doubted you were ever meant to. You measure the self with the self, a mirror looking into a mirror. This is the identity measurement error. You assume your actions reveal the truth about who you are, but your actions are shaped by the very identity you're trying to measure. And the deeper you go, the more tangled it becomes. Because now, you act out of loyalty, not to reality, but to consistency. You stay in a job you hate because you're a responsible person. You ignore an opportunity because you're not someone who takes risks. You cling to pain because you're the one who suffered, and suffering is part of who you are now. So you keep proving your identity with actions you don't even question anymore. And then, when someone challenges that identity, when they say, Maybe you are creative. Maybe you are courageous. Maybe you are lovable. You feel resistance, not because they're wrong, but because if they're right, then everything you've done to uphold the old story might have been unnecessary. And that kind of realization feels like death, because the identity you defend isn't just a description. It's your defense mechanism. It's the scaffolding that holds your life in place. But what if that structure is built on a feedback loop? What if the real you isn't in your behavior or your beliefs, but in the gap between them? The part of you that watches both. The part of you that says, I did that, and I'm not proud of it. But maybe I'm more than that action. The part that whispers, I've always been this way. But maybe I don't have to be. That awareness, that's your exit. The way out of the loop isn't to find the answer, it's to question the equation. To stop asking, what do my actions say about me? And start asking, what assumptions shaped those actions in the first place? Because once you realize identity is a script, and you're both the actor and the ghostwriter, you can start to revise. Not overnight, not with force, but gently, curiously. You take one action that contradicts the old story. You tell yourself, just for today, maybe I'm someone who can try. You do something surprising, not to prove anything, but to see what happens. And in that moment, the measurement collapses. You're not confirming the past, you're creating the future, and identity becomes fluid again. Not a verdict, not a label, a possibility. So, the next time you define yourself by what you've done, pause, look closer, ask, was that action who I am, or who I thought I was allowed to be? And when that question echoes, follow it. Because the real you isn't found in what you've done. It's found in what you're still capable of doing once you stop measuring and start becoming. The time loop, thought. You wake up. Your mind drifts to yesterday, something you said, something you didn't. A moment replayed in your head, as if you could rewind and edit it. But you can't. Still, you relive it. Then the anxiety creeps in. What about tomorrow? What if it goes wrong? What if you're not ready? What if everything changes? And in the space between those two thoughts, the past you can't change, and the future you can't control, you miss the only moment you truly have. Now, the present. But here's the twist. The present doesn't stay. It doesn't wait. By the time you realize you were supposed to live it, it's already behind you. Gone. It becomes the past. The very past you were just thinking about. And that's the time loop thought, a psychological paradox, an emotional trap. You think about the past while fearing the future and missing the present, then realize the present was the past you were already thinking about. It's a loop, an echo chamber made of time. You live inside your head, chasing moments that either haven't happened or already slipped away. And the worst part? You know you're doing it. You catch yourself thinking about tomorrow's meeting, or last week's mistake, or next year's plan. And you try to stop. You try to breathe, to be mindful, to ground yourself in the now. But the now is fragile. The second you hold it, it breaks. Like water cupped in your hand, it slips through your fingers while you try to examine it, because the now is not designed to be held. It is only meant to be lived. But we don't live in the now. We live in loops. Thought loops, memory loops, fear loops. You remember your childhood and think, those were the good days. But back then, you were probably doing the same thing, worrying about the future or regretting something from the past. You didn't know you were in the good days until they became memory, until they entered the loop. This is why nostalgia hurts. Not because the past was better, but because you didn't fully experience it while it was happening. You were too distracted, too busy, too preoccupied with thoughts of something else. Maybe you were thinking about today, and now that today is here, you're still somewhere else. That's the loop. That's the haunting cycle we call consciousness. You are always one step behind yourself, always catching up to the life you meant to live. And when you finally notice the moment, it's already gone. Time is not a straight line. It's a psychological spiral. The mind loops through moments, searching for meaning, for control, for answers. But meaning is rarely found in loops. It's found in presence. And presence is terrifying. Because when you are fully in the now, you have no excuse. You can't hide in memory. You can't predict your way out of it. You are just here, exposed, vulnerable, real. That's why we avoid it. That's why we love to daydream, to rewind, to forecast. It gives us distance, a buffer zone between ourselves and the rawness of being alive. But every time we escape the present, we miss it. And when we finally turn back to notice it, it's already part of the past. And we think about it. And the loop begins again. Let's take a real-world example. You're at dinner with someone you love, but you're thinking about an email you forgot to send. You're there, physically, but not there. You're not tasting the food, not noticing the expression in their eyes, not hearing what they just said. And then the moment passes. Later that night, you remember it. You think, that was nice. But you didn't live it. You remember what you should have felt, and now that memory becomes the stand-in for the moment you missed. That is the time loop thought. Living backward. Feeling delayed. It's not time travel, it's time fragmentation. And the more it happens, the more disconnected we become from life itself. The truth is, we don't experience life. We experience our thoughts about life. And those thoughts are always a little late, a little after, a little once removed. So what do? How do we step out of the loop? You can't escape it entirely. That's the hard truth. The brain is a meaning machine, and it uses memory and prediction to survive. But you can interrupt the loop. You can notice it. And that noticing, that awareness, is itself a kind of awakening. The moment you say, I'm thinking about the past again, you return, briefly. The moment you say, I'm afraid of a future that hasn't happened, you breathe. And in that breath, you find the only truth that matters. You are here, not yesterday, not tomorrow, here. It won't last, but nothing does. That's why it matters. So, next time your mind begins the loop, when the past pulls you back and the future pulls you forward, pause. Ask yourself, what part of this moment am I not living? Then, live it. Even for 5 seconds. Because 5 seconds of pure presence are worth more than 5 days lost in memory. The time loop. Thought will come back. It always does, but so can you. The external validation trap. You feel a rush, a tiny spark, a quiet thrill. Someone says, good job. Someone smiles. Someone clicks like or nods or claps or tells you they are proud. And something in you exhales, as if you'd been holding your breath without even realizing it. You feel seen. You feel real. You feel worthy. But what happens next? You repeat the behavior. You tweak your words. You bend your tone. You shift, just slightly, to maintain that glow. The glow of approval, of being liked, of being chosen. And slowly, silently, without a single dramatic moment, you begin to lose yourself. You're not changing who you are all at once. You're editing, calibrating, masking. Tiny adjustments, one by one, because now the applause is addictive. Now the smile matters. Now the reflection in someone else's eyes feels more real than the one in the mirror. This is the external validation trap, and it is so gentle, so quiet, that you don't even notice you're inside it. Until one day, you wake up and realize they love you, but not the real you. They love the version you performed, and suddenly their praise feels hollow, because it wasn't meant for your truth. It was meant for your performance, and you start to wonder if anyone has ever loved the you beneath the masks, the one who is messy, unfiltered, raw, the one who doesn't shape themselves to be seen but simply exists. The paradox cuts deep. You crave connection. But when that connection is built on performance, it never feeds the soul. It only feeds the fear. The fear that if you ever stop performing, the love will stop too. You start posting what you think will get likes, saying what will be applauded, dressing, acting, even thinking in ways that avoid disapproval. And each time someone approves, it confirms your suspicion. You're only safe when you're pleasing others. This trap doesn't just live in social media, it lives in relationships, in families, in jobs, in classrooms. You become the golden child, the top performer, the ideal partner. And deep down, you're terrified that if you let them see who you really are, they'll recoil, they'll withdraw. They'll say, oh, that's not what I expected. So you hide again, you overachieve, you oversmile, you over-apologize, because approval becomes a drug. And withdrawal feels like death. But here's the soul-crushing part. Even when you get the validation, it doesn't last. The high fades, The praise wears off, and you need more likes, more praise, more attention. Not because you're shallow, but because you're starving for something real, something that doesn't disappear the second you stop performing. And in your quietest moments, you wonder, who would I be if I stopped chasing it? Who am I when no one's looking? Would I still be enough? For me? Here's the hard truth. As long as your sense of self-worth depends on someone else's approval, you're not truly free. You're not living. You're being auditioned. And the worst part is, even if you get everything you ever wanted, fame, success, applause, you'll never be able to believe it. Because you'll know, deep down, they're not clapping for the real you. They're clapping for the mask. But the mask is heavy. And eventually, it cracks. And when it does, you have a choice. You can double down, polish the act, force the smile, or you can begin the terrifying, liberating process of taking it off. Not all at once, not recklessly, but slowly, deliberately, truthfully. You start saying what you actually think, doing what feels aligned, letting people see the sides of you that don't shine on stage, the uncertainty, the weirdness, the softness, the real. And yes, some people will walk away. Some will say, "You've changed." But others will come closer, because they weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for truth. And you gave them permission to be real too. That's the gift of escaping the trap. You stop living for validation. You start living for alignment. And in that alignment, you begin to feel a different kind of joy. A quieter one, a deeper one, not the shout of applause, but the calm hum of authenticity. Because when you are no longer seeking approval to feel whole, you become untouchable, unshakable, not arrogant, but grounded, not loud, but real. And the most beautiful part? When someone loves that version of you, the unfiltered, unedited, inconvenient you finally believe them, because now you know they're not loving the mask, they're loving you. The purpose collapse loop. Imagine chasing something your entire life, only to discover that the act of chasing was the only thing keeping it alive. That's the purpose collapse loop. You want purpose. You seek meaning. But needing purpose becomes its own purpose. So, when do you stop searching? And if you do, have you found peace, or have you just surrendered? From childhood, we're taught to find our path. What do you want to be when you grow up? They ask. Not who, but what. As if your existence requires a job title to be valid. So we set out like pilgrims, looking for a sacred task, a unique role, a calling. And when we don't find it fast enough, we feel lost. But what if the search is the trap? What if the need to have a purpose is what prevents you from living in one? This isn't just a spiritual dilemma, it's psychological. Studies show that humans crave meaning. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote that man's primary drive isn't pleasure, it's purpose. But even he warned that purpose must be freely chosen, not imposed. And here's the paradox. If you need purpose too badly, you'll accept anything that feels like meaning, even if it's false. You'll overwork. You'll attach to toxic ideologies. You'll stay in broken relationships. You'll turn hobbies into hustles, all to feel driven. But eventually, the fuel runs out. And then the collapse begins. You question the thing you once lived for. You wonder if it was ever real. Maybe it was someone else's dream, or a reaction to fear, or just momentum. And now you're stuck. Because not wanting purpose feels like failure, but needing purpose feels like addiction. This is the loop. You keep circling it, asking, what's wrong with me? Why don't I feel fulfilled? Is this the wrong job, the wrong person, the wrong planet? But maybe it's the wrong question. Maybe you were taught to chase something that can't be caught, only inhabited, like air, like rhythm, like being. Because purpose isn't a trophy. It's a way of walking, a posture toward life. And the irony? When you stop obsessing over finding it, it begins to appear. In the small things. In the people you love. In the work that tires you but leaves you glowing. In the silence between goals. But we've been conditioned to ignore that. To think purpose must be grand, public, legacy-shaping. something others can see and praise. So, we dismiss the quiet callings, the invisible kindnesses, the unglamorous hours. And yet, that's where life happens. That's where purpose lives. Not in a headline, but in a heartbeat. And when we let go of the need for purpose, we don't lose meaning. We gain freedom. Because freedom isn't the absence of direction. It's the ability to choose your direction without fear, even if no one else understands it, even if it never fits on a resume, even if it changes tomorrow. But the collapse doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like grief, like identity loss, like death. When the career you built your life around loses meaning, when the role you played, parent, partner, leader, no longer fits, when the thing that once lit your fire no longer even flickers, that's when people spiral into depression, numbness, apathy, or worse, distraction. They fill the void with noise, consumption, self-comparison, anything but silence. Because in the silence, you face a haunting truth. You don't know who you are without a goal, but maybe that's okay. Because who you are isn't a goal, it's an unfolding. A river isn't less valuable because it doesn't know where it ends. The moon doesn't need a purpose to glow. Birds don't sing to win awards, they just are. So what if you let yourself be a little bird-like? What if you built a life not around a singular purpose, but around presence? That doesn't mean you stop striving. It means you stop seeking permission to matter. You stop needing every action to validate your worth. You stop treating your existence like a resume, because you're not a mission. You're a moment. And that moment, if lived honestly, is enough. Purpose will find you when you stop demanding it show up in a costume. Sometimes it wears sweatpants, or tears, or silence, or joy with no cause. Sometimes purpose is planting a seed you'll never see bloom, or saying yes when you're afraid, or saying no when you're tired, or just breathing and knowing that breath was not wasted. So don't collapse when the old purpose dies. Stay and listen, because what comes after the collapse might not be flashy, but it might finally be real. You are not here to perform meaning for the world. You are here to live meaning into the cracks, to feel the pulse of purpose in small gestures, to be loyal to your inner compass, even when it spins, because maybe purpose isn't a finish line. Maybe it's the warmth of walking barefoot on your own truth. You don't find it, you live it. And you don't need to explain that to anyone, especially not to the voice that says you're lost, because the only thing lost is the idea that you ever needed to be found. The emotional echo chamber. You feel sad, but the sadness doesn't arrive alone. It brings a shadow, guilt. You tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way, that others have it worse, that you should be grateful. Now the sadness is contaminated. You're no longer just sad. You're wrong for being sad. Then comes the anger. Anger that you can't just feel without judging yourself. Anger that your mind turns everything into a moral failure. And before you know it, you're not even sure what the original feeling was. You're caught inside the emotional echo chamber, a self-reinforcing loop where every emotion triggers another emotion about itself. This chamber doesn't just trap you, it multiplies you. Each layer of feeling spawns a new identity: the guilty self, the angry self, the ashamed self, the analyzing self. And all of them talk at once. All of them echo off each other until it becomes deafening inside your own skin. You try to escape by fixing the feeling. You journal. You meditate. You intellectualize. But often, the tools you use to heal become new ways to judge. Why am I still like this? Why haven't I outgrown this yet? And just like that, the echo chamber thickens. Even joy gets infected. You smile, then wonder if it's fake. You feel a moment of peace and immediately scan it for flaws. Am I avoiding something? Is this too good to last? The joy erodes, not because it wasn't real, but because the chamber doesn't allow unexamined peace. Every emotion is pulled into a review loop, evaluated, questioned, punished. You feel tired, but then feel lazy. You feel anxious, then feel weak for being anxious. Each emotion is forced to answer for itself. Nothing is allowed to simply exist, and slowly, you become emotionally exhausted. Not from the feeling itself, but from the courtroom built around it. This is how the echo chamber works. It's not just pain, it's recursive pain. It's pain about pain. And that recursion grows heavier the longer it goes unchallenged. You start avoiding feelings altogether. You numb out, you distract, you disassociate, because feeling becomes a trap, not a release. But here's the paradox. The escape isn't through fixing, it's through witnessing, through learning to sit with the first feeling before it multiplies. Sadness as it is. Not as a flaw, not as a failure, but as a signal, an emotion without an echo. To sit in sadness and say, this is allowed. That's how you break the chamber's walls. But that's not what you were taught. You were taught to solve emotions, to beat them, to fix yourself fast, clean, and quiet. So the moment an uncomfortable emotion arises, the inner voices activate. What's wrong with me? Haven't I already worked through this? I thought I was better now. These thoughts aren't healing, they're surveillance. They scan for flaws, not to soothe, but to control, and in that control, you lose touch with the raw truth underneath. It becomes a cycle. You become your own jailer, locked in a cell of your own reactions, reacting to reactions, until it's not even about what you feel, it's about your judgment of what you feel. And the worst part is that this loop can look productive. From the outside, you're self-aware, you're doing the work, but inside, you're suffocating, because you've mistaken emotional management for emotional freedom. Imagine what it would be like to feel something and not immediately evaluate it, to cry without asking why, to feel angry without apology, to feel joy without suspicion. What would your inner life be like if emotions were allowed to be weather, passing, real, unargued? You weren't meant to live in an echo chamber. You were meant to live in an open field, where emotion moves like wind, sometimes gentle, sometimes storming, but never wrong for existing. You are not failing because you feel too much. You are not broken because your sadness returns. You are human. And your emotional system is not a machine, it's a song. It plays notes you didn't expect, in keys you didn't choose, but they're yours, and they matter. So when the echoes rise, when the sadness becomes guilt, then shame, then rage, pause. Trace it back to the first feeling, the honest one. Sit with it. Name it without narrative. Let it breathe, and the echo chamber will soften. Not all at once, but enough to hear your real voice again. The one that doesn't judge, the one that simply feels, the one that has always been waiting for silence. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's the absence of interrogation. It's where the sadness can sit beside the joy, where the guilt doesn't need to confess, where the anger doesn't need to defend. It's where the chamber collapses, not in a crash, but in a sigh. Because the walls were never real. They were built from expectation, from fear, from misunderstanding what it means to feel. And now you see it. You're still feeling. But you're no longer echoing. You're no longer trapped in the recursive cage of should. You are feeling, fully, finally, free. The energy spiral dilemma. You're too tired to fix what's draining you, but it's draining you because you haven't fixed it. And now, you're stuck, caught in a spiral with no clear start and no obvious end. A loop where the solution is the problem, and the more you think about escaping, the more trapped you feel. This is the energy spiral dilemma. You wake up already exhausted, not just physically, but existentially. You look at the unfinished conversations, the messy room, the unread messages, the unresolved emotions, and you want to care. You want to take action. But all you feel is the weight of everything. So you sit with it, you scroll, you distract, you numb, you delay. You tell yourself you'll handle it when you have more energy. But the energy never comes. Because it's being leaked, slowly, silently, by the very things you're postponing. That unread email, that job you've outgrown, that person who drains your spirit every time you talk, that decision you keep avoiding. They sit in the background like open apps in your mind, quietly eating your battery while you pretend they're not running. And you wonder why you're always on low power. It's not just the things you're doing. It's the things you're not. It's the thousands of quiet, invisible moments where your brain keeps circling back to what you haven't faced. You tell yourself it's fine, that it's not urgent, that you'll feel better tomorrow, but tomorrow becomes another today. And the spiral deepens. Because the longer you avoid the thing, the heavier it becomes. The more tired you feel, the more impossible it seems. And the more impossible it seems, the less likely you are to start. Eventually, you don't even know what you're tired from. You just are. And now, even joy feels distant. Even rest doesn't recharge you, because it's not just sleep you're lacking. It's resolution, closure, movement. The human brain wasn't designed to carry infinite unfinished loops. It craves completion. It aches for momentum. But you keep it trapped in limbo, waiting for a version of you to show up with more strength, more clarity, more courage. That version hasn't come because you're still waiting, still spiraling, still asking, how do I fix the thing that's making me too tired to fix it? The answer isn't grand, it's microscopic. It's not break the cycle, it's interrupt the spiral, not by solving everything, but by touching one thing. One drawer, one message, one sentence spoken out loud that you've kept buried, one decision, no matter how small, that sends a signal to your nervous system. We're not frozen anymore, because that's what this is. Freeze, paralysis, burnout in disguise, and the only way out of freeze is friction, not force, not panic, just a spark, a change of state, a shift in posture, a breath that reaches deeper than the last one, a choice that feels too small to matter, but matters anyway, because the energy won't come before the action. It comes from the action. Not all of it, not instantly, but enough to power the next step, and then the next. And eventually, what once felt like a mountain becomes a hill, and the loop you thought you were trapped in, you realize it was never a circle, it was a spiral, and even spirals move upward if you take the next curve. So the next time you feel too tired to fix what's draining you, don't wait for energy. Start with motion. Start with anything. Because forward, no matter how slow, is still the only direction that breaks the spiral. The fixation bounce back. Don't think about it. That one sentence is all it takes to unleash it. A name, a face, a mistake, a fear. The more you try to push it away, the more vivid it becomes. Louder, closer, clearer. You try not to think of something, and so you do. This is the fixation bounce back. A cognitive trap so simple, so common, that you've fallen into it hundreds of times without realizing. The brain's attempt to erase a thought only makes it stronger. Like a psychological echo, the harder you press delete, the deeper the imprint becomes. Try this. Don't think of a pink elephant. You just did, didn't you? Not because you wanted to, but because the instruction not to think of it required your brain to simulate it first, just to know what to avoid. And in doing so, it lit up the very neurons you were trying to suppress. That's the cruel design. The mind must model the thing it wants to erase, and now the image sticks. The fixation bounce back doesn't just live in mental exercises. It lives in your anxieties, in your heartbreak, in your guilt. You try not to think about the person who left. You try not to remember the embarrassing moment. You try not to panic during the panic. But all that effort only fuels the fire, because to fight a thought is to feed it. And the mind, in trying to push it away, accidentally pulls it closer. It's not your fault. It's how consciousness works. Psychologists call this ironic process theory, the idea that your brain has two mechanisms at war, one that tries to suppress a thought, and another that keeps scanning to make sure it's gone, but the scan itself reactivates it, like checking a locked door again and again, and each check making you less certain, not more. It's a feedback loop, an attention trap. Let's say you're lying in bed, trying not to think about tomorrow's stressful event. You tell yourself, don't think about it, just sleep. But the instruction requires a checkpoint. Your brain keeps asking, am I thinking about it? And of course, in asking, you are. So you spiral. You toss and turn. You build walls of silence in your mind, only to hear the thought knocking louder on the other side. This is why some thoughts become obsessions. Not because they're powerful, but because you made them forbidden. You built a do not enter sign around them, and that sign turned into a spotlight. The forbidden thought becomes the focus. The more you reject it, the more it defines you. This is the paradox. Resistance gives it roots. Rejection gives it energy. Erasure engraves it. So, how do you escape? The answer is strange, counterintuitive, even uncomfortable. You don't fight it. You allow it. You let the thought exist. You stop making it the enemy. You treat it like background noise, not a command, not a threat, just a mental visitor that arrived, and will leave when you stop giving it a seat at the table. This is the power of non-resistance, Because fixation needs friction, it needs tension. When you remove the resistance, the loop weakens. When you accept the thought without judgment, it loses its edge. Let's take an example. You're haunted by a memory, something shameful, and you try every day to block it out. But the more you resist, the more it sneaks into your mind at odd moments. During work, during sleep, during peace. Now imagine instead you say, yes, I had that moment. It happened. It's part of me, but it's not all of me. And then you move on. You didn't suppress it. You made space for it. And in that space, it softens. This isn't about giving up. It's about stepping out of the game, about realizing that some thoughts are like shadows. The more you chase them, the longer they stretch. The fixation bounce back is not a flaw. It's a feature of how attention works. Attention magnifies. What you look at glows brighter. What you fear grows teeth. So, the question becomes, how can you change your relationship to thought itself? Not by force, but by focus. By choosing where your awareness lands, not what it runs from. And that choice rewrites the cycle. Imagine your mind is a stage. A thought enters, uninvited. You can try to kick it off. Or you can dim the spotlight and watch it walk away on its own. That's the way out of the bounce back. Not through silence, but through surrender. Not through control, but through compassion. You're not weak for having intrusive thoughts. You're human. The mind is not a perfect machine. It's a storyteller, a projector, a filter. And sometimes it replays scenes you didn't ask for. But you are not your thoughts. You are the space that hears them. So next time a thought returns, louder, sharper, more stubborn, don't brace for war. Open the door. Let it sit. Let it fade. Let it pass. Because the delete key doesn't erase, it highlights. But awareness, the soft kind, can do something better. It rewrites. The anxiety planning loop. You make a plan. Because without a plan, the chaos creeps in. So you build one, carefully, obsessively. You write it down. You color-code it. You imagine every outcome, every risk, every variable. You think ahead, 2 steps, 5 steps, 10. Just to stay ahead of the thing you fear most, losing control. At first, it feels good, organized, safe. You feel ready, prepared, protected. You've built a map, and with that map, the world feels less terrifying. But then something shifts. You start planning, again and again. Not because the original plan was bad, but because it might not be perfect. Because what if something goes wrong? What if you missed something? So you revisit the plan, you revise it, you make a backup, and then a backup to the backup. And slowly what began as a tool becomes a cage. This is the anxiety planning loop, a spiral of self-defense disguised as productivity. You don't even realize it's happening. Because on the surface, you look organized, responsible, smart. People admire your foresight, but inside, you're not planning to succeed. You're planning to survive your own thoughts. What started as a way to reduce fear now generates it. Because the more you plan, the more you see what could go wrong. And the more you see what could go wrong, the more urgently you plan. It becomes a loop, self-feeding, self-reinforcing, exhausting. Let's say you're planning a trip. You research every hotel, every route, every possible weather pattern. You print your itinerary, highlight landmarks, pack for every scenario. You feel ready. But then a thought hits you. What if the hotel loses your reservation? What if there's traffic? What if your charger breaks? So you create contingencies, and soon you're no longer planning the trip. You're planning your escape from the trip, from the panic you've woven into it. And now, the plan doesn't comfort you. It traps you, because there's too much to keep track of. Too many just-in-case scenarios. Too many ways to fail. So you plan more. Not because it helps, but because doing nothing feels worse. This is the terrible irony of anxiety-driven planning. The more you plan to stop panicking, the more panic you create. You begin reacting to your own imagined fears, designing strategies for futures that may never come. And each layer of planning is meant to calm you. But instead, it makes you responsible for more details, more outcomes, more pressure. Until finally, the planning becomes the very thing you were trying to escape. You lie awake at night, not fearing the unknown, but fearing the complexity of your own system. You're no longer afraid of the event. You're afraid of failing your plan. So you start planning how to escape the plan. You say, maybe I'll just cancel everything. Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I'll just stay home. And in that moment, you feel a strange kind of peace. Not because you solved the problem, but because you gave yourself permission to stop planning. It's not laziness. It's relief. But then the guilt creeps in. What if I should have tried harder? What if something goes wrong now? And so the cycle begins again. So how do you break it? Not by planning harder, but by asking a different question. What am I afraid will happen if I don't control every detail? That's where the truth lives. Maybe you're afraid of being embarrassed, or of missing something, or of letting someone down, or of discovering you were never really in control at all. And that's the terrifying truth underneath the loop. You were never really in control to begin with. Life doesn't follow blueprints. People cancel, weather shifts, flights delay. No matter how precise your outline, the world will move in its own way, and that's not a failure, that's reality. The purpose of a plan is not to protect you from fear, it's to help you move forward despite it. You don't need 17 contingency plans. You need resilience. You need to trust that even if the plan fails, you won't. You'll adapt. You'll respond. You'll figure it out like you always have. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, "This is enough. This plan is good enough. And if it goes wrong, I'll survive." Because real peace doesn't come from preparing for everything. It comes from knowing you don't have to. You can rest. You can stop rewriting. You can let the world unfold without you gripping every gear. You're not weak for needing a plan. You're human. But you're also strong enough to know when to let go. So breathe. Unclench. Step out of the loop. The world will still turn. And maybe, just maybe, without the weight of overplanning, you'll finally have room to live. The self-reflection, refraction. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not to admire yourself, but to understand yourself. You stare into it, expecting honesty. But what if the mirror bends? Not the glass, but the reflection itself. What if what you see isn't truth, but distortion shaped by your fears, your hopes, your past? This is the self-reflection refraction, a phenomenon where the act of looking inward creates not clarity, but illusion. You think you're being honest with yourself, but the honesty is warped by what you need to believe. Because we rarely reflect to see, we reflect to feel safe. Think about it. When you ask, "Am I a good person?" you don't want the answer. You want reassurance. You want the reflection to say, "Yes, you're doing your best." Even if deep down, you know there are moments you chose convenience over kindness, moments you hurt someone and excused it as necessary, but your mind bends that reflection, reframes it, softens it. That's how cognitive dissonance works. The brain protects your identity from fracture. If your actions contradict your self-image, your mind bends the facts to fit. It smooths over guilt, polishes over mistakes. It doesn't lie outright, it refracts, just enough to keep your self-story intact. But it doesn't stop there. You reflect on your past, on failures, regrets, old relationships. But memory is plastic. Every time you revisit it, you reshape it. You emphasize certain moments, downplay others, add emotional color where none existed. The memory you're analyzing may not even be real anymore. Studies in psychology show that memory is not a file being accessed. It's a story being rewritten each time it's recalled. Reflection is not a mirror, it's a lens. And every lens distorts. And what about aspirations? We look into our imagined future and say, "This is who I'll become." But often, we're reflecting on a fantasy, not a plan, a projection of who we wish we were, not who we're becoming. And when we fail to become that fantasy, we say, "I failed." But maybe we only failed a lie. Self-help culture doesn't help. It tells you to reflect constantly, journal every thought, microanalyze your emotions. But constant self-reflection can become performance. You curate what you discover. You dig only where it feels flattering or poetic. You skip the rot. You become a character in your own narrative, and you start to confuse that character for the self. You've become both the actor and the audience, but neither sees clearly. This is the tragedy of self-awareness. It promises truth, but often delivers theater. A breakup doesn't just hurt because someone left. It hurts because, in reflecting on it, You construct a version of yourself that wasn't enough. But is that true? Or is it just the shape your grief needs to take? Maybe they left for reasons that had nothing to do with you, but the reflection you carry is personal, intimate, warped. Or think of success. You achieve something. People applaud. And when you reflect on your journey, you see a narrative. You were always destined, always persistent, always right. But what if it was luck? What if it was timing? The truth is, we only ever see one path, the one we took. All the alternate routes fade from memory. Reflection becomes revision. History becomes a myth. Even guilt is distorted. You feel bad about something, you reflect, you apologize, but sometimes you're not sorry. You're afraid of being the kind of person who wouldn't be sorry, so your reflection performs remorse. And slowly, even you believe it. This is the refraction. Not deception, but distortion. Not malice, but momentum. The self bends to survive, to be loved, to remain coherent. But coherence isn't clarity, and survival isn't truth. So, how do you break the loop? How do you see through the glass? First, you stop asking the mirror to confirm your worth. You ask it to reveal what hurts. You ask it to show what you're avoiding. You ask it to reflect not just what's there, but what's missing. And then, you look away. Not to escape, but to re-enter your life. Because real self-understanding doesn't happen in the mirror. It happens in motion, in failure, in contradiction, in the people you let down, in the boundaries you set, in the mornings you wake up and try again. Self-reflection is useful, but it's not sacred. It can trap you as easily as it frees you. So treat it like fire, warming but dangerous. Don't live inside it. Don't believe it without question. And when it starts to look too perfect or too tragic, step back. Because that's not you. That's a version. A silhouette on a fogged-up mirror, and you're not a reflection. You're the one still breathing on the glass. So wipe the mirror, not to erase yourself, but to make space for clarity. Not for the past you pretend to remember, not for the future you've rehearsed too many times, but for the self that's always changing. The one that doesn't fit in reflections. The one you meet only in quiet acts of courage, in kindness without witness, in truth without applause. Maybe the real you isn't someone you find. Maybe it's someone you become when you stop trying to see clearly and start living honestly. Not bent, not filtered, not refracted. Just here, just now, just real. The randomness rationalization loop. A coincidence happens. You see a number repeat. A friend calls just as you were thinking of them. A song plays that matches your mood too perfectly. Your mind lights up. It means something. You don't just notice the event, you frame it. You attach significance. The universe is winking, something is aligning, and now you're alert. This is the randomness rationalization loop, the invisible cognitive spiral where your brain begins to filter the world through the lens of synchronicity. Not because reality changed, but because your interpretation did. One strange moment unlocks a search for more, and your perception, once neutral, now hunts for patterns. Suddenly everything might mean something. A word on a billboard, a glance from a stranger, a glitch in traffic. You start collecting evidence. You build a narrative. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to tell coincidence from message, randomness from design. You're not irrational. This is what minds do. We're wired for pattern seeking. It helped us survive. But now, it builds stories out of chaos. It constructs intention from happenstance. And those stories begin to shape behavior. You start making decisions based on meaning. You take a certain street because of a dream. You avoid a person because of a symbol. You delay a conversation because of a gut feeling that the timing isn't right. The line between logic and magic blurs, not because the world is clearer, but because you're searching more intensely for coherence. And then something strange happens. The more meaning you assign, the more patterns you see. Not because more patterns exist, but because your brain is scanning for them. You've opened a feedback loop. Coincidence triggers meaning, meaning alters perception, and altered perception finds more coincidence. You think you're decoding the universe, but you might just be listening to your own echo. This doesn't make your insights wrong. It makes them human. Our need for meaning is ancient. We can't bear randomness, so we shape it. We attach stories to accidents, divine timing to chance, fate to chaos. It gives us comfort, control, a sense that something larger is guiding the mess. But what happens when that story breaks? When the signs stop making sense? When two coincidences conflict? When a clear signal leads to confusion or pain? The narrative starts to fracture. You question your intuition. Or worse, you double down, forcing interpretation even when it hurts. And that's the danger. The danger isn't that you believe in signs. It's that the signs start replacing your inner truth. You wait for the universe to say yes when your gut already knows no. You cling to the pattern even as it pulls you away from what's real. And now you're not living, you're decoding. You become addicted to interpretation. You stop trusting your own clarity. You check numbers, pull cards, ask for omens. Not out of wonder, but out of fear. Because if the universe doesn't confirm your next move, you feel paralyzed. But randomness isn't the enemy. It's the raw material of freedom. It's the space where newness emerges. And the more you try to crush it with meaning, the more you close off possibility. Sometimes, a coincidence is just that. A moment. A flicker. A glitch in probability. And that's okay. Not everything has to mean something to be beautiful. Not every alignment is a prophecy. Some are just poetry with no explanation, and maybe that's enough. So, how do you escape the loop? You stop asking what it means and start asking how it feels. You come back to the body, to the moment, to the breath beneath the narrative. You let the coincidence pass without forcing it into a shape. You let the randomness stay random. You trust that your life can move forward without a cosmic breadcrumb trail. And then something remarkable happens. Life opens up again. The air feels lighter. The world becomes a playground, not a puzzle. You stop waiting for signs and start living from signal. The signal of your own intuition, rooted in presence, not paranoia. You stop watching life like a riddle and start living it like a story, fluid, chaotic, and yours. You stop asking the world to wink at you. You stop demanding that every feather, every number, every flickering light be a message. Because you begin to see, the miracle isn't the pattern. The miracle is that you noticed it all, that you were awake, alive, feeling, that your awareness wrapped around a moment and called it sacred, and that is meaning enough. The loop breaks not when meaning ends, but when you no longer need it to prove anything. You look up at the sky. The clouds don't form a shape today, and still, you breathe, you walk, you live, without the signal. Because the signal is in you. You are the meaning you were waiting for. And you've been here the whole time. There's no code to crack. No hidden riddle to unlock your purpose. Just you, in this moment, choosing to stay curious. Not because the universe whispered your name, but because you finally listened to your own. The productivity identity loop. You are what you produce. That's the belief. Not because someone said it, but because the world showed it to you over and over again. Praise when you finish something, silence when you don't, validation when you work overtime, discomfort when you rest. So now, rest feels like failure, stillness feels like decay, and anything that doesn't generate results makes you feel invisible, irrelevant, or ashamed. This is the productivity identity loop. It begins quietly. You work hard, you finish a task, you feel useful, you get praise, a moment of meaning, and your brain takes note. This is who I am. This is what makes me valuable. You attach your worth to what you do, and that attachment grows stronger with every reward. So you keep producing, not just for income, but for identity, not just to move forward, but to feel real. But then comes the moment when you stop, maybe by choice, maybe by burnout, maybe by force. And suddenly, without output, you don't know who you are. You can't sit still. You can't enjoy quiet. Because in the absence of work, all the unprocessed voices return. You're lazy. You're wasting time. You should be doing more. And so, you get up. You work harder. You chase the feeling of being back on track. Not because it brings joy, but because it silences the shame. But the joy fades faster now. Because it's not about the work anymore. It's about staying ahead of the collapse. It's about avoiding the feeling of being no one when you're not performing. So, you become what the world rewarded. Efficient, responsive, always on. But with every cycle, the cost increases. Your hobbies become side hustles. Your thoughts become content. Your relationships become networking. And your body becomes a machine you punish for not keeping up. Until, one day, you realize you've forgotten who you were before the productivity. What did you value? before it was monetized? What did you enjoy before it had to scale? What made you you before you started measuring your worth by what you could prove? You don't remember, because the loop erased it, not out of malice, but out of momentum. And now, rest isn't just hard, it's terrifying. Because rest brings silence, and silence reveals the emptiness underneath, the part of you that hasn't been nourished in years, the child who never learned how to just be, the soul that aches to exist without expectation. But here's the truth. You are not your output. You never were. You are not a task list, a calendar, a metric. You are a human being who has been taught to see life as performance, value as productivity, existence as evidence. But you're allowed to be empty sometimes, to pause, to breathe, to disappear from the machine without disappearing from yourself, because the deepest parts of you aren't productive. They're present. Your capacity for love, wonder, stillness, curiosity. None of it shows up on a resume, but it's the core of who you are. And if you never rest, if you never stop, you'll forget that core completely, and the loop will win. It will devour you in the name of success. So step back, not to quit, but to remember. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are coming home to a version of you that doesn't need to earn oxygen. You are allowed to exist, even when you're not producing. And maybe that's the most radical thing you can do in a world addicted to proof, to rest, and still know you are enough. The narrative loop trap. You start telling yourself a story. You're the underdog, the survivor, the hero in progress, the broken soul on a journey of redemption. It comforts you, gives your life direction, meaning, a plot. You see your setbacks as necessary trials, your heartbreak as character development, your failures as foreshadowing. It's beautiful, but slowly, silently, it becomes a trap. Because now, every moment must fit the arc, and stories require conflict, drama, pain, so you start looking for it, creating it, engineering struggle just to maintain the illusion of progression. You're not just living, you're narrating. This is the narrative loop trap, the brain's addiction to framing life as a story, not because it's real, but because it's familiar, because a story has shape, and life, real life, is shapeless, chaotic, unpredictable. But the mind can't sit with chaos, it needs structure. So it invents one, a plot line, a through line, a narrative. But that structure has demands. The story must escalate. The protagonist must suffer. The tension must rise. Otherwise, it's boring, unworthy, unreal. So now, even peace feels wrong. If things are going too well, you suspect something's off. You wait for the fall. You dig for hidden problems. You manufacture breakdowns just to feel like the story is moving forward. It's not that your life is dramatic. It's that your story demands drama. This is how you trap yourself. You turn healing into a monologue, grief into poetry, conflict into plot progression. You start seeing people not as humans, but as characters, foils, antagonists, plot devices, and worst of all, you flatten yourself. You become a trope, a theme, a summary. You forget that life is not a movie. It has no script, no guaranteed ending, no soundtrack to guide your emotions. But you want one. Because in a story, everything makes sense. Even pain has purpose. Even trauma has meaning. But real pain is rarely that clean. Real trauma is disordered, illogical, sometimes pointless. And still, your mind begs to wrap it in metaphor, to reframe the random as fate, to shape chaos into narrative. Because a messy truth is harder to live with than a beautiful lie. Let's take a real example. You go through a breakup. Instead of just grieving, you start telling yourself, "This is my rebirth. I'm becoming stronger. I had to lose them to find myself." And maybe that's true. Maybe that helps. But maybe, just maybe, you're rushing the pain, forcing it to fit an arc, compressing complex emotions into an act break. Not because you've healed, but because the story needed closure. And that's the danger. You live inside a fiction, one you wrote, one that comforts you and cages you at the same time. The narrative loop trap doesn't just shape how you see your past, it controls your future. Because now, you're not making choices freely, you're choosing what fits the storyline. You start asking, what would the character version of me do? Instead of, what do I need right now, as a real person? You reject peace because it feels like filler. You reject people because they don't fit. You reject joy because it breaks the tragic arc you've grown addicted to. And the loop continues. The more you identify with the narrative, the harder it is to live outside it. The story becomes armor. You tell it so often, it becomes truth. You wear it so tightly, you forget who you were before it. So how do you escape? You stop writing. You stop narrating every moment like it's part of some climactic finale. You stop framing your life like it needs to make sense. Because life doesn't need to make sense. It needs to be felt. To be lived in real time, not summarized. Not repackaged, not told, just lived. You wake up and you exist, without a lesson, without an arc, without some cosmic symmetry, and in that space, you find something more honest than story. You find presence. Let go of the need for meaning in every frame. Let the plot collapse. Let the next chapter be silence. You're not a narrative. You're a moment, a breath. A flicker of consciousness in a universe that doesn't owe you clarity. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The awareness spiral. You notice a thought, a passing word, an image, a memory. It flickers in your mind, and you become aware of it, like a spotlight suddenly shining on the stage of your own head. You catch it, you watch it, and in that moment, you are no longer just thinking, you are aware that you are thinking. But then something stranger happens. You notice the noticing. You realize that you're watching your mind. And then, like falling backward through glass, you ask the question, who is doing the watching? And just like that, you're no longer inside the thought. You're above it, outside it, floating somewhere behind your own eyes, asking if the you that watches is the same as the you being watched. This is the awareness spiral, a mental recursion. A loop of self that folds in on itself again and again until you can no longer tell where the mind ends and the watcher begins. It feels profound. It feels terrifying. It feels like waking up inside your own skin and not knowing how to get out. Because once you start noticing your own awareness, you can't unsee it. You look at your hand, and you're not just seeing a hand. You're seeing the experience of seeing. You're aware of your awareness, and then aware that you're aware that you're aware. And now, you're not just living, you're watching yourself live. You walk through the room, but feel detached, like a spectator, like the body is just a puppet and you're somewhere else, in the audience, observing the play with no script. This spiral can be triggered by anything. A random thought, a moment of stillness, a philosophical conversation, or even the question, who am I really? Not your name, not your job, not your history, but the awareness behind the eyes, the thing that knows you're here, the silent observer that never speaks, but always listens. And once you begin to ask who that is, everything changes. Because it's not a question that can be answered. It's a question that dissolves the one asking. You realize you are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. But then, if you are observing your thoughts, and now observing the observer, how far does it go? It's like a mirror reflecting a mirror. Infinity. No ground, no center. Just awareness noticing awareness, looping endlessly like waves inside a silent ocean. Some people call this awakening. Others call it depersonalization. Some experience peace. Others, panic. Because the spiral doesn't always feel like enlightenment. Sometimes it feels like falling. Like the floor of identity has collapsed, and you're left weightless in a void you can't name. You wonder if you're real, if anyone else is real. If this moment is happening or just being watched by something you can't touch. And yet, there's something beautiful here too. In this spiral, you see how thoughts are not solid, how emotions rise and fall like weather, how you is not a single thing, but a river of shifting patterns. And you begin to sense that the awareness, the pure awareness, has always been there, long before your name, long before your stories, long before you knew what identity even meant. It watched your childhood, your heartbreaks, your laughter, your pain. It watched you succeed. It watched you fall apart. And it said nothing. Because it is not here to judge, it is here to witness. And that witnessing is who you are. Not the voice in your head, not the roles you play, but the quiet seeing beneath it all. You are not trapped. You were never trapped. You were simply too close to notice the space between you and the thought. That space, that stillness, that is freedom. So when the spiral comes, don't resist it. Don't fight the recursion. Just sit with it. Let it swirl, let it turn, and know that at the center of the spiral, there is nothing to fear. Only the self, seeing itself. And when you're ready, come back. Breathe, blink, touch something real, drink water, speak a name. You are still here. But now, you know, you've seen the space behind the mirror, and nothing will ever look the same again. The waiting loop illusion. Imagine standing at the edge of a road, waiting for the perfect moment to cross. Cars blur past. You hesitate. You tell yourself, not yet. Minutes pass, then hours, then years. This is the waiting loop illusion. You wait for clarity before making the move. You wait for confidence before speaking your mind. You wait for permission, for perfection, for proof. But what if waiting isn't just a delay? It's the thing keeping you trapped. This illusion is subtle. It wears good intentions. I'm being patient. I'm being wise. I'm not ready yet. But sometimes, what we call patience is just fear wearing polite clothing. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself you'd start when things got easier, when the timing was better, when you felt more certain? But the world doesn't reward those who wait forever. The world doesn't pause while you rehearse your courage. Instead, something strange happens. You begin to wait for the end of waiting. You look for the signal that tells you the waiting is over, and when it doesn't come, you interpret that as a sign to keep waiting. You're now caught in a feedback loop, a cycle that feeds itself, a trap that feels like safety, but is really stagnation. Psychologists call this the intention-action gap. You have the desire, you know what you want, but the leap between knowing and doing becomes a chasm, filled with hesitation, what-ifs, and imagined disasters. So, instead of acting, you prepare, you plan, you make lists, you research endlessly. You build mental blueprints of a future that only exists if you dare to step into it. But that step, it never comes. Because every day you wait, the fear grows stronger, and the muscle of action grows weaker. You become a ghost in your own life, haunting potential paths, but never walking them. And society rewards this loop. It says, be responsible, be realistic, don't rush. But what it really means is, wait until it's too late. Wait until the job is gone, the relationship has passed, the spark has died, the window has closed. Waiting is seductive because it pretends to be wise, but wisdom without motion becomes rot. Even worse, we start to build identities around the waiting. I'm working on it, we say. I'm figuring it out. These phrases become shields, not from others, but from ourselves, from the terror of trying and failing. But failure is not your enemy. It's your only exit from the waiting room. You won't learn confidence from thinking. You'll learn it from stumbling forward. You won't find clarity by standing still. You'll find it in the blur of movement. Most importantly, you won't escape fear by avoiding it. You'll escape by facing it while your hands shake. Consider the people you admire. Were they fearless, or did they move anyway? Every artist, leader, lover, and risk-taker has one thing in common. They stopped waiting. Not because they were ready, but because they refused to let the loop consume them. And what about the moments you regret most in life? Are they the ones where you acted too soon, or the ones where you waited too long? We wait for the right time to say, I love you, to quit, to apologize, to begin again. But time doesn't wait back. It doesn't hold the door. It doesn't rewind the clock. It just leaves. And waiting becomes its own language, a lullaby that whispers, maybe tomorrow. But tomorrow is built by the actions of today. There is no right time. There is only time, and it's running. This doesn't mean rush blindly. It means stop pretending that standing still is safer than moving. You are not a draft. You are not a prototype waiting to be perfected. You are already here, already capable, already burning with potential disguised as hesitation. The next step is not a mystery. It's the one you've been ignoring while waiting for something louder to arrive. It's the call you haven't made, the truth you haven't spoken, the project you've buried under perfectionism, the life that aches to be lived but can't until you take its hand. Waiting is not neutral, it's expensive. It costs you years you can't refund. It costs you dreams that don't return. It costs you the person you could become, if only you'd begin. So, if you're listening to this and your chest is tightening and a part of you says, "This is me," then don't wait for more proof. This is your proof. This is the mirror. This is the door. And no one else is going to open it for you. Not time, not fate, not tomorrow. Only you. The loop ends now, if you say so. Because in the end, the scariest truth is not that you might fail, but that you might wait forever. That your life could become a museum of unattempted dreams. That you'll reach the end with a heart full of unopened doors. You don't need to be fearless. You need to be honest. You're not stuck. You're stalling. And the longer you pretend otherwise, the tighter the loop becomes. So breathe, decide, move. The moment is never perfect, but it's yours. And it's waiting for you to stop waiting. The self-image feedback loop. You're alone. No one's watching. And still, you pose. You catch your reflection, not just in mirrors, but in minds. You imagine how others might see you, how they might judge, how they might admire, dismiss, compare, and suddenly your behavior shifts. You laugh a little louder. You hide the hesitation. You perform, not for them, but for the version of you they might be seeing. This is the self-image feedback loop, a psychological distortion where your identity becomes tangled with an imagined audience. You're not just living, you're narrating, projecting, managing perception. You act based on how you think others think you are. And here's the twist. The others don't have to be real. The loop forms in solitude. You build a version of yourself in someone else's eyes, then react to it. You become both actor and spectator, endlessly watching your own performance. You're not being fake, you're surviving. Social belonging once meant survival. So your brain evolved to scan for cues, read the room, fit the mold. But in the modern world, this scanning never ends. The room is digital, the audience is infinite, and the loop spins faster than ever. You pick your outfit not just for comfort, but for how it will read. You tell stories that land well. You edit your expressions. You catch yourself mid-thought and ask, how would that sound if someone else heard it? That's not paranoia, it's calibration. You've been doing it so long you forget there's a you beneath the performance. Even in private moments, the audience remains, a ghost in the room, a composite of past judgment, social rules, digital feedback. You post something and refresh, heart racing. Will they approve? Will they validate this fragment of you? Will they believe the version you've presented? And if they don't, you shapeshift again. You become what they might prefer, and the loop deepens. Every reaction to your projected self becomes data. Data you use to further refine the mask. But the more refined it gets, the harder it becomes to remember what's underneath. So, are you smiling because you're happy, or because you've learned that your smile reassures others? Are you helping out of kindness, or because your self-image is built on being seen as good? You might never know. This is the danger of the loop. It doesn't trap you with lies, it traps you with half-truths, with glimpses of who you could be, curated and polished for acceptance. You feel real, but split. You walk through the world like an actor trapped in a role they never auditioned for, rehearsing lines no one asked you to memorize. And even if someone tells you, just be yourself, it lands hollow, because you're not sure who that is anymore. The version they like is the version you crafted. The laughter they praise is practiced. The vulnerability they applaud is selected. So now you wonder, if I stopped performing, would anyone stay? Would they even recognize me? The loop doesn't break by force. It breaks through tenderness, through quiet rebellion. You start by noticing the moment you shift. That pause before the smile. That impulse to say the right thing. You trace the string back to the imagined audience, and you gently ask, who am I trying to be right now? Not to shame, not to dismantle, just to see. And slowly you begin to find moments of realness, not curated, not optimized, just honest. You let your laugh be too loud. You let silence hang. You answer a question without worrying how it lands. And for a moment, you feel whole, not performing, just being. You start talking to yourself again. Not the version they expect, but the voice that never left. the one who speaks before the edit, before the audience arrives. You let that voice choose sometimes, even when it's awkward, even when it risks being misunderstood, and slowly the loop begins to loosen, not disappear. It still hums in the background, but it no longer drives. You begin to sense when you're drifting into the mirror of imagined eyes, and you return. You call yourself back, not with anger, but with invitation. You don't need to vanish the audience. You just need to stop giving them the script. Because you were never meant to be watched. You were meant to be lived. So you drop the pose. You let your shoulders fall. You forget how you look for a moment, and remember how it feels to simply be. That's the break. That's the breath. That's you, stepping out of the feedback loop and back into your life. No applause, no spotlight, just breath, just life, just you, unwatched, unfiltered, finally enough. And in that quiet, something returns. Not confidence, not certainty, but presence. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The kind that whispers, I'm here. And finally, that's enough. You were never meant to be a reflection. You were meant to be a moment, uncaptured, unexplained, but deeply, endlessly true. No more mirrors, only windows. And outside the window, there you are, not performing, not adjusting, just existing. The numbness recalibration loop. You feel nothing, no joy, no sadness, no clarity, just fog. You wake up and go through the motions, smile when expected, speak when necessary. But inside, there's nothing. Not emptiness, not peace, just static. And then, quietly, the question comes. Why do I feel like this? You search for a cause. Did something happen? Did something break? Did you miss a moment when you were supposed to react, but didn't? And that question starts to unravel something, because now you're not just numb, you're anxious about the numbness. You wonder if something's wrong with you. You remember what it used to feel like to be excited, or angry, or hopeful, and you wonder where those parts went. You start scanning for proof that you're still capable of emotion, but the scan comes up empty, and the anxiety deepens. You try to feel something, anything, but it doesn't work like that. You can't force emotion to return just because you're asking nicely. So you freeze again. The numbness settles back in, not because it's comfortable, but because it's all that's left, and now you're spinning. This is the numbness recalibration loop. It starts with detachment. Then comes the self-questioning. Then comes the panic that something's wrong. Then, as a defense, your mind numbs you further. Because if you can't fix the numbness, your brain decides the safest thing to do is lean into it. Shut down. Tune out. Protect you from the rising panic of not knowing why you're like this. And every time you cycle through this loop, it becomes harder to remember what real feeling even is. You forget what music used to move you, what made you laugh uncontrollably, what love used to feel like when it was fresh. Now, it all feels distant, muted, like watching your life through a window you can't open. And people notice. They ask if you're okay. You say you're tired, or busy, or just dealing with things. But the truth is harder to explain, because you don't feel broken. You don't feel much of anything. And that's the problem. So you try tricks, you try dopamine, stimulation, overstimulation. You chase a feeling with food, music, scrolling, caffeine, and distractions. But it doesn't land, because this isn't about missing excitement. It's about misalignment. Your system is trying to recalibrate from overload. You were overwhelmed for too long. Too many emotions. Too many expectations. Too much noise, inside and out. So your brain did what it had to do. It turned the volume down. It numbed you to survive. And now you're caught in the side effect. A feedback loop where the numbness makes you question your sanity, and the questioning causes enough anxiety to reinforce the numbness again. But maybe you're not broken. Maybe this loop is a symptom of healing, just not the kind that feels good. Maybe numbness is your nervous system's way of forcing a pause, a reset, a space for the pain to stop echoing. Not forever, just long enough to build a container for feeling again. Because numbness doesn't mean you're incapable of emotion. It means your mind is trying to protect you from feeling everything all at once. But that protection doesn't last forever. It breaks, cracks, And when it does, the first emotion that returns might not be joy. It might be grief, or guilt, or confusion. Let it come, even if it hurts, because pain is proof that the circuit is opening again. And after pain, eventually, comes light. But it won't come faster just because you're asking. The more you panic, the tighter the loop gets. So instead, sit still. Don't fight the numbness. Notice it. Name it. Watch it without judgment. And remind yourself, this is not forever. This is your body remembering how to feel safely. Even now, under the static, something inside you is still alive, still waiting, still listening. The sleep performance spiral. You lie in bed. The room is quiet. The lights are off. You've done everything right. No caffeine, no screens, the perfect setup for sleep. And still, you're awake. Not just awake, but alert. Your heart is beating faster than it should. Your body feels tired, but your mind is on edge. And now, you're thinking about why you can't sleep. And that thought is what keeps you awake. This is the sleep performance spiral. It begins with the most innocent of goals, trying to fall asleep. But trying becomes effort. Effort becomes tension. Tension becomes anxiety. And anxiety is the one thing sleep cannot coexist with. So you try harder. And the harder you try, the more sleep slips away. It's like trying to fall in love by force, or trying to relax while holding your breath. The very act of trying becomes the reason it doesn't happen. You're not broken, you're caught. Because sleep is not something you do, it's something you allow. And allowing cannot be forced, but your brain doesn't know that. It wants results, it wants control. You watch the clock, you count the hours. You calculate how little time is left before morning. You tell yourself, if I fall asleep right now, I'll get at least 4 hours, then 3, then 2. And with every calculation, the pressure grows. Now, sleep isn't just a need, it's a test, and you're failing. This is performance anxiety, redirected inward, a quiet war with your own biology. The mind becomes a manager with a stopwatch. The bed becomes a stage, and your body forgets how to surrender, because you're not resting. You're auditioning for rest, and your audience is your own hyperactive mind. You lie still, hoping it will come, but hope turns into impatience, and impatience turns into frustration. And now your thoughts are racing, asking, what's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong. You're simply locked in a loop, a spiral of self-monitoring, self-measuring, self-judging. And here's the truth that hurts. You cannot outthink yourself into sleep. You cannot logic your way into dreams, because sleep begins where control ends. It doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to permission, and permission feels like safety. That's why you sleep better next to someone you love, or in a room where you feel protected, or on days when your mind is unburdened. But when your mind is tight, tense with responsibility or fear, your body interprets it as danger, and sleep does not happen in danger, even imagined danger, even quiet, invisible, middle-of-the-night danger, because your nervous system listens to mood, not intention, and trying to sleep sends a signal that something is wrong. So what do? Paradoxically, you let go of the goal. You stop trying to sleep. You replace performance with presence. You focus on comfort, not outcome. You tell yourself, it's okay if I don't sleep right away. I will rest. I will lie here. I will soften. You bring your awareness back to the body, not the clock, not the thoughts, but the body, the rhythm of breath, the weight of the mattress, the quiet of the room. You become an observer, not a fixer. Because sleep happens when you stop being the director. You do not fall asleep. Sleep falls over you. And for that to happen, you have to stop climbing. You have to stop chasing the moment and let the moment find you. Let's take a real example. Imagine someone lying in bed after a long, stressful day. Their brain is buzzing, so they try harder to sleep, telling themselves, you have a meeting tomorrow, you must sleep. But that pressure keeps them wired. Now, imagine instead they say, it's okay. Even resting with my eyes closed is healing. I'll stop forcing and just feel the warmth of the blanket. That shift matters because effort creates noise. Surrender creates silence. And silence is where sleep begins. The sleep performance spiral is real. It is invisible and it is common, but it is not permanent. The way out is not discipline, It's softness, not control, but compassion. You cannot earn sleep. You can only receive it. And to receive it, you must let go. Not just of the day, but of the idea that you need to do anything at all. Because you don't. You're already here. Already enough. Already safe. Let that be your lullaby. The identity archive loop. You remember. Not because you want to, but because you need to understand who you are, to piece it all together. You rewind the scenes, the laughter, the pain, the choices, the moments that defined you. Because somewhere inside that archive, you believe your identity lives. You look back to make sense of the now. Who hurt you? Who shaped you? What you've survived? What you've become? And for a moment, it feels solid, like truth. This is who I am. Because of what happened to me. Because of where I've been. Because of what I remember. But then something cracks. You revisit the memory again. And it's different. The details shift. The tone feels altered. The villain in the story is less sharp. Or maybe you're not as innocent this time. Or maybe you're more broken than you remembered. And suddenly, you're not sure if you're recalling the past or rewriting it. This is the identity archive loop. A cycle where memory shapes identity and identity shapes memory, twisting back on each other like a snake eating its own tail. A loop with no fixed origin. Because your memories don't exist in isolation. They're filtered by who you are right now. And who you are right now is already built from the memories you think are true. It's a paradox. You look into the mirror of the past to understand yourself, but the mirror changes as you do. You remember a childhood moment, a conversation, a silence, a look. You think it meant something. Maybe it did. But the meaning isn't static. It bends with time, with age, with pain, with healing. Was your father distant? Or were you just afraid? Was that friend cruel? Or were they wounded too? Were you the victim? Or was it just more complicated than that? Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Each time you visit it, you don't just watch it, you edit it, unconsciously, emotionally, narratively. You insert current beliefs into old moments. You project your present self backward, and slowly your memories become less about what happened, and more about how you feel about what happened. And yet, you still rely on them to define yourself, to explain why you flinch, why you isolate, why you love too hard or not at all. You say, "This is just who I am," pointing to a version of the past that's already changed 1,000 times. And then it gets worse, because your present identity, the one built on warped memories, now begins to warp your future. You act out patterns you believe are part of you. You fear abandonment because you always have. You self-sabotage because that's just how you are. But how much of that is real? And how much is memory, echoing louder than it should? You try to fix yourself by digging deeper, looking for the first time you felt shame, the first time you were hurt, as if there's a single moment to blame, but the archive is alive, and the deeper you dig, the more you stir. You think you're reaching clarity, but you might just be reinforcing the loop, building a story that makes sense, but isn't true. So what do you do when the very tool you use to find yourself is the same one reshaping you with every use? You pause. You breathe. You soften. You realize that identity is not a fossil, it's a flame, and memory is not a library. It's a painting, made with a trembling hand, lit by ever-changing light. You don't escape the loop by discarding your past. You escape it by releasing your grip on it, by seeing your memories as stories, some true, some half-true, some beautiful, some unbearable, but all filtered through the lens of now. And when you do that, you create space. Space to choose who you are now, instead of only reacting to who you think you've always been. You're not just a sum of what happened. You're also what you do with it. You're the rewriter, the reframer, the one who can look back and say, "That happened, but it does not own me." You are not your archive. You are the one beyond it, the witness, the presence, the voice behind the loop. And maybe that's enough. Not perfect understanding, but quiet freedom. Not flawless memory, but peace with the blur. You're here now, alive, aware, capable of becoming someone new. Even if the past still echoes, because now you know, even if the archive loops, you don't have to loop with it. The choice collapse, trap. Imagine standing at a fork in the road. You weigh your options. You gather what you know. You make the best possible decision, and you feel good at first. But then time passes. New information arrives. Suddenly what once felt right now feels wrong. What once looked like clarity now looks like a mistake. You question everything. This is the choice collapse trap. It's not just regret. It's the realization that the ground you stood on when you chose has shifted. That the best decision wasn't best at all, but only looked that way through the narrow keyhole of the past. You didn't have the full picture, but now you do. And the trap isn't that you were wrong. It's that your brain punishes you as if you should have known better. This illusion is deeply human. We believe that smart choices lead to good outcomes. But in reality, choices are gambles, and time rewrites the odds. In psychology, this is known as hindsight bias, the tendency to see events as more predictable after they have already happened. It tricks you into believing that the signs were obvious, that you missed something everyone else saw. But the truth is, you didn't. The signs only became clear in the rearview mirror. You chose to trust someone. Then they betrayed you. Were you a fool? Or did you make a human decision with the data you had? You took a job offer that seemed promising. Months later, the company collapsed. Did you misjudge, or were you just caught in a shift no one could predict? You made the best choice you could, with the map you had. The trap is believing that your past self should have read a map that didn't exist yet. And this belief corrodes self-trust, because if every future brings new facts, then every past decision becomes suspect. You begin to fear choosing at all. You hesitate, you delay, you wait until there's enough information. But enough never comes, because time always adds new pages, and choice always collapses in hindsight. And here's where the loop deepens. You start revisiting every fork in your life, relationships, careers, words you did or didn't say, and you begin to rewrite history, not with truth, but with shame. You say things like, if I had only known, or I should have waited, or worse, I ruin everything. But you didn't ruin anything. You were doing your best. You always were. It's easy to see the cracks now, after the collapse. But when the walls stood tall, you couldn't have known where they would break. No one can. This trap also breeds perfectionism. You start obsessing over every minor choice, what to say, where to go, when to act. You think if you calculate enough, if you wait long enough, you can outsmart collapse. But you can't, because life isn't static. The best will always shift, and the choice will always expire. But here's the twist. Collapse doesn't mean failure. It means growth. The decision you made then created the path that brought you here. And here is where you learn. Here is where you evolve. So maybe the point was never to choose perfectly. Maybe the point was to choose fully. To choose fully means to stand behind your past self with compassion. To say, you made a brave call, and I thank you. Even if it hurt. Even if it led to heartbreak or loss, you tried. Because the alternative is paralysis, the endless scrolling through imaginary timelines, the aching for do-overs that never arrive, the belief that you must somehow know everything before you live anything. And that's not life. That's fear with a spreadsheet. Real life? Real life is movement through uncertainty. It's deciding while trembling. It's choosing before you're ready and still showing up for the consequences. And that is courage. It's the parent who moves cities for their kid's future, only to find struggle, not ease. It's the artist who left a safe job to chase a vision, only to feel lost, not free. It's the lover who said yes to forever, only to watch it unravel. And yet, would they undo the choice? Or did the collapse become part of their becoming? Maybe this is the truth hidden inside the trap. Collapse is not the enemy of choice. It's the echo, the shadow of motion. The way the universe says, you moved, you mattered, you tried to shape the chaos. So stop punishing yourself for choosing with an old map, and stop expecting maps to stay accurate. Instead, bless your past for being brave enough to choose, and bless yourself now for being brave enough to revise. You don't need to fear the next collapse, because collapse isn't the end of the path. It's just the signal that you're still walking, and the fact that it hurts. That just means it mattered. You are not your broken outcomes. You are the force that chose anyway. You are the motion behind every version of best that existed in that moment. And you will keep choosing. Not perfectly, but honestly, because perfection is a myth that collapses under time. But presence endures. So choose with presence. And if collapse comes again, let it. You're not here to avoid it. You're here to outgrow it. The thought broadcast illusion. You walk into a room and something in you tightens. It's not the people. It's the thought you're holding. Maybe it's embarrassing. Maybe it's intrusive. Maybe it's just out of place. But suddenly your brain whispers, what if they can tell? You feel exposed. Like your thoughts are leaking through your skin. Like someone could glance at you and know. That's the thought broadcast illusion. A psychological phenomenon where you believe your private thoughts are somehow public, that others can hear them, sense them, feel them. And that belief changes everything. You tense up. You avoid eye contact. You fidget. You stutter. And just like that, people do start to notice. Not your thought, but your reaction to it. They pick up on the discomfort, the defensiveness, the shift in tone, and they respond. Now the illusion feels real. Not because they read your mind, but because your body told them there was something to read. This is the loop. The more you believe your thoughts are visible, the more visible your reactions become. The illusion feeds itself. You start to edit your behavior. You walk more carefully. You avoid saying things that might confirm what they're supposedly already sensing. You speak less, or you speak more in a frantic attempt to cover it up. And now the real danger appears. Not that your thoughts are exposed, but that your sense of identity becomes distorted. You begin to live in anticipation of others' reactions, not to your words or actions, but to the shadow of your inner world. You become your own censor. This illusion is especially brutal for people with anxiety, trauma, or obsessive thinking. One intrusive thought spirals into a full-body reaction. You blush. Your voice trembles. Your breathing shifts. And someone asks, "Are you okay?" Now your worst fear is confirmed, not because they saw the thought, but because they saw you crumbling beneath it. But here's the paradox. Your thoughts are not visible. They never were. They remain locked inside the fortress of your mind. What others see is the storm you summon to hide them. But in trying to protect your thoughts, you accidentally shine a spotlight on them. You behave like someone with a secret, and that behavior is what people respond to. Not the content of your mind, but the shape of your silence, the tension in your shoulders, the hesitations between your words. You are broadcasting, not thought, but fear. And that fear creates its own story. You start to believe you're transparent, that every stray idea reveals you, that your internal world is a window, not a wall. And the more you believe it, the more it becomes true, through posture, tone, avoidance. You begin rehearsing every interaction in your head, replaying them after they end. Did they notice? Did I sound weird? Did they pick up on that? But you're not analyzing the conversation. You're analyzing the performance. And that analysis becomes your new prison. You forget what it's like to just be. You don't speak your mind. You don't express freely. Because expression feels like exposure. Vulnerability feels like a trap. You live beneath a psychological spotlight, always wondering if someone sees what you are thinking before you even speak. And then it worsens. Your silence starts to communicate more than your words ever did. Because when you avoid people, they sense it. When you withdraw, they feel it. They start building their own stories about you, not because of your thoughts, but because of your distance. And so, the illusion creates reality. You feared they'd judge you for your thought, so you changed your behavior. They judged the change, and you took that as confirmation of the thought. This is the feedback loop that rewrites identity. Not from the outside, but from within. A self-fulfilling distortion. You think they know. They don't. But now they do, because your fear changed how you moved through the room. So how do you escape? Not by erasing the thought, not by suppressing the fear, but by reclaiming the silence between stimulus and reaction. By remembering that a thought is not a signal, it's a cloud. It passes. It doesn't need to be hidden because it was never seen. Let them see your stillness. Let them see your groundedness, not as a mask, but as your truth. Because thoughts are not confessions, they are weather. Let them move through you, and let the world respond not to your fear, but to your presence. Because that's what they were always reading anyway. Not your mind, but your energy. Not your secrets, but your story. And your story is still yours to tell. You are not leaking. You are not exposed. You are not broadcasting. You are simply thinking, and that's allowed. Let the thought come, let it go, and let yourself stay. Unjudged, unread, unburdened. You don't need to be decoded. You don't need to be invisible. You only need to remember. Thoughts aren't transmissions, they're reflections, and you decide what reflects. The simulation self-check loop. You ask the question, am I in a simulation? You ask it in quiet moments, when the room feels too still, when time feels bent, when coincidence stacks just a little too perfectly. The question lands in your mind like a code trigger, unlocking a spiral of suspicion. You look around, at the lights, the textures, the way your thoughts echo. You try to catch the glitch, you try to see the seams, but you never do, because the question is part of the code. It's designed not to free you, but to trap you in the loop. This is the simulation self-check loop. It feels like a search for truth, but it's a containment protocol, because the moment you ask if this is a simulation, your brain lights up with philosophical processing. You chase the big questions, you analyze details, you wonder what's real, what's fake, who's watching, but that search never ends. It's infinite. Because it's not meant to resolve, it's meant to distract. The question keeps you orbiting, close to the core, but never inside it. Because here's the deeper glitch. The simulation doesn't hide in pixels. It hides in patterns, in the scripts you repeat, in the feelings you rehearse, in the identity you re-download every morning like an operating system booting up. You're not supposed to ask why you feel trapped. You're supposed to keep asking if you're trapped. That's the loop. Because as long as you frame it as maybe, you'll never act like it's real. You'll just observe, wonder, scroll, watch other people asking the same question, and feel slightly smarter for noticing. But you won't go deeper, because deeper means risk. It means pulling at the threads of your identity. It means unlearning the rules that shape your every behavior. It means asking, who told me what's normal? Who benefits if I obey? What would I see if I stopped searching out there and started inspecting the code within? You've noticed the signs. Déjà vu that feels like a checkpoint reset. People repeating the same words on different days. Your emotions snapping back to default, no matter how hard you try to change. You feel it, that something is being maintained. But instead of investigating the maintainer, you keep running the self-check. The question is a loop. It doesn't reveal the truth. It reinforces the barrier around it. You think you're getting closer. But the system predicted that too. It knew you'd eventually question reality, so it gave you breadcrumbs, theories, philosophers, movies, quotes. It gave you just enough mystery to keep you busy, so you'd never reach the place where the code actually lives. Because it doesn't live in math or physics. It lives in your conditioning, in the part of you that asks for permission to rest, that waits for approval to speak your truth, that fears what might happen if you stop performing the version of yourself you were taught to maintain. That's the real simulation. Not made of ones and zeros, but of expectations, beliefs, roles, and the way they loop so perfectly that you can't tell where you end and the programming begins. So, the next time the question rises, am I in a simulation? Don't follow the spiral outward. Follow it inward. Ask, why do I keep repeating the same emotions? Why do I feel like I'm being watched even when I'm alone? Why does real change feel like glitching? And then pause. Because in that pause, you step outside the loop. Just for a moment. Not to escape, but to see. That the question was never meant to be answered. It was meant to keep you circling the edge of something dangerous, something powerful, something true. The recursive doubt engine. You start with a question. You question what you believe, what you saw, what you said, what you meant. And that seems like a good thing. Doubt sharpens you, makes you careful, makes you thoughtful. But then, you question your doubt. You ask yourself, what if this doubt is wrong? What if I'm right? Or what if I'm wrong about being wrong? And suddenly, you're not thinking clearly anymore. You're spiraling. That's the recursive doubt engine. The mind begins by checking itself, and then rechecks the checker. It tries to validate its own reasoning by doubting the doubt. But this loop doesn't resolve, it accelerates. You lose track of the original question. Your logic engine collapses in on itself, like a snake eating its own tail. Every answer gives birth to another question. Every conclusion feels fake, manufactured, incomplete, and the noise begins. At first, it's subtle, just a hum in the background, but then it grows, a rising tension, a pressure behind your eyes, a sense that no thought is trustworthy, no belief is solid, no clarity is safe. You've entered the loop, and now the loop is thinking you. It's no longer about reason, it's about dissonance, about the mind consuming itself in an effort to become certain. But certainty never comes, because the doubt isn't just external, it's recursive. It points back at itself. You doubt the world, then doubt your view of the world, then doubt the doubter within you. And then you doubt whether the whole thing is even real at all. This is not just philosophy, it's mental erosion, the kind that eats your peace, that corrupts your sense of direction. You try to ground yourself with logic, but logic becomes liquid. You try to build a ladder, but every rung bends. The deeper you go, the less solid anything feels. This happens to philosophers, to perfectionists, to people caught in anxiety spirals, and to anyone whose mind was trained to dissect itself. Imagine a writer who rewrites the same sentence 100 times, not to improve it, but because no version ever feels true enough. Or someone in a relationship who questions every word their partner says, not out of paranoia, but because they don't trust their own interpretations anymore. Or a spiritual seeker who begins to question their reality, their beliefs, their senses, and then questions the questioning itself, until all that's left is noise. The recursive doubt engine doesn't just create uncertainty, it erodes meaning. And without meaning, the mind panics. So it builds new thoughts, new frameworks, new theories. But those collapse too, because if you don't trust the foundation, how can you trust the house? This is where people break, where they become exhausted, not from action, but from thinking. Because recursive doubt burns energy, constantly, silently. It's like running mental antivirus software that keeps scanning itself. So, how do you escape? You don't fight it. You don't outthink it. You step outside the engine, you stop running recursive checks, and accept what no logic loop can give you: imperfect certainty. A quiet, human-level trust in your own perception, even if it's flawed. You remind yourself, doubt is a tool, not a god. It is meant to protect you, not define you. It's okay to doubt, but not every thought needs a footnote. Not every feeling needs analysis. Not every question deserves an answer. Some things are lived, not proven. Some truths are walked, not solved. When you feel the recursive doubt engine starting up, pause. Breathe. Feel the chair beneath you, the air on your skin, the present moment, before the thoughts start spinning it into fragments. Because awareness is older than language, older than logic. You knew how to be present before you knew how to question. Return to that. You're not a broken machine. You're a conscious being, learning to hold contradiction without needing to collapse it. Doubt what needs doubting. But don't doubt the sky just because it's quiet. Don't doubt yourself just because certainty is silent. And when the engine whispers, "What if this is wrong too?" Smile. Let it whisper. Let it loop. And then, let it go. The final reflection spiral. You stop. You pause. You begin to think. Not just about a problem, but about your own thoughts. You wonder, am I thinking clearly? Am I seeing this the right way? You question your reasoning, your biases, your clarity. It feels like responsibility, like maturity, like you're holding your mind accountable. But then it turns, it folds in on itself. You realize, to think clearly, you need a clear thinker. But how do you know if your thinking is clear when the tool you're using to measure it is the thing being measured? This is the final reflection spiral, a cognitive Mobius strip, a loop where your mind chases itself in circles, asking if it's trustworthy, using itself to make the judgment. It starts small. You make a decision. But doubt creeps in. You double check. You second guess. You want to be sure. So you reevaluate. But now, you're not just evaluating the decision. You're evaluating your ability to evaluate. You think, wait, is this overthinking? Or Am I catching something real? Am I being wise or paranoid? Am I self-aware or self-sabotaging? And suddenly, there's no solid ground, no neutral place to stand, because every thought you have is contaminated by the very doubt you're trying to resolve. It feels like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror, like trying to bite your own teeth. You twist inward, looking for a place in your mind that's untouched, unbiased, pure. But every place you land is still you, still the same mind you're trying to examine. And now, you don't know what to trust. You ask, do I really believe this? Or is this belief just a defense? You ask, is this intuition? Or fear? Is this reason? Or rationalization? And the longer you stay here, the more unstable the ground feels. Because if the mind can't trust itself, what's left? You want to find truth, but you're trapped inside the instrument. You are both the observer and the observed, both the judge and the accused. You feel like a hallway of mirrors. Every insight reflects another. Every reflection leads to a deeper one, until you're not sure whether you're thinking or just watching yourself think. This spiral isn't just philosophical, it's emotional. Because with every new doubt, you lose a little more confidence in your center. You lose the feeling of, I know what's real, and instead, you fall into, I don't know if I even know how to know. You start to fear your own thoughts, second-guess your instincts, mistrust your memories, your self-image wavers, your confidence collapses, and worst of all, you start to wonder if this spiral proves something's wrong with you. But it doesn't. In fact, it proves something beautiful, something rare. You are conscious, you are awake, you are self-aware to a level that few ever reach. You are confronting the raw truth of being human, that we have no perfect lens, that even our clearest thoughts are painted by emotions, experiences, fears. And yet, you still search, still ask, still try to see. And that's not weakness, that's courage. The spiral only traps you when you demand perfection, when you think you need total clarity before taking a step. But clarity isn't a destination, it's a rhythm, a flicker, a light that comes and goes. You don't escape the spiral by finding perfect thought, you escape it by accepting imperfection, by acting with grace, even when unsure. Sometimes the wisest move is knowing you'll never know completely, but choosing anyway. So breathe. Let go of the need to be certain. Let go of the belief that you must solve yourself before living. You are allowed to move forward, even with questions, even with noise. Trust is not about being sure. It's about showing up anyway. Your thoughts may spiral, but you don't have to fall with them. You can watch, acknowledge, and gently return to what matters, to what's real, to what's in front of you. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are simply awake in a world that offers no perfect mirrors, and still, you continue to seek the light. That alone is clarity enough.